Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I got home on Wednesday evening feeling tired and irritable from a long day at work. As soon as I stepped onto my porch, I saw a small cardboard box on the doormat. It had no labels, no return address, and no markings. It looked ordinary at first, but something about it felt wrong. The tape was uneven and the flaps were slightly torn. I hesitated, then I bent down and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. My arms felt tense and I kept looking around to see if anyone was watching. There was nobody on the street, just a couple of parked cars and dim porch lights on the neighboring houses. I locked my front door behind me and carried the box to the kitchen table. I dropped my keys on the counter and turned on the overhead light. The box sat in the center of the table, looking out of place. My home is usually quiet when I arrive. No pets, no roommates, just the hum of the refrigerator. That night felt different, though. It felt like something was about to happen. I could sense my pulse throbbing in my ears. I told myself to calm down and get it over with. I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut the tape along the top. Inside, I found a layer of crumpled newspaper. Under that, there was an object wrapped in bubble wrap. It was about the size of my fist, maybe a bit bigger. When I pulled off the bubble wrap, I saw a shape I couldn't easily describe. It was made of a dark, shiny material, almost like stone. It had uneven edges, small ridges, and a hole on one side. It had no clear function. It didn't look like any tool or piece of art I'd seen before. I felt a dull ache in my stomach, as if I'd just realized something important but couldn't name it. My hands started trembling a little. I checked the box for a note or card. Nothing. I thought maybe someone had sent me a weird gift by mistake. I set the object down on the table and ran my hand over its surface. The material felt cold and a bit rough. I tapped it against the tabletop and it made a dull clack, almost like a rock. I stayed there for a moment, staring at it. I felt nervous, but I also felt curious. I decided to leave it on the table for the night. I wanted to see if maybe there was an address label hidden somewhere in the packaging. But the box was completely blank. No shipping label, no barcodes, nothing. I looked at the time and realized it was almost 8 p.m. I decided to heat some leftover pasta. I tried to act normal. I turned on the TV in the living room and kept an eye on the kitchen table, half expecting that strange object to move on its own. It didn't move, of course. But the air felt charged. My skin felt sensitive, like after an intense workout. My legs felt restless, so I paced around the living room until my food was ready. When I finally sat down to eat, I couldn't keep my gaze off the kitchen table. I just watched the silhouette of that weird shape in the dim light. Later that night, I went to bed. I left the object on the table because I didn't want it in my bedroom. I closed the door to the kitchen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I usually sleep fine, but that night I tossed and turned. My blankets felt too hot, but the air felt too cold. My mind kept drifting to the shape of that thing. I wondered who would send me something like that without a note. I checked my phone for missed calls or messages, but nothing explained it. I dozed off around midnight, but it was a restless sleep. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound. It was a dull scraping noise, like a chair being dragged across the floor. My heart started pounding faster than usual. My throat felt dry. I got up, still in my boxers and an old t-shirt, and walked slowly toward the hallway. My floor creaked under my feet. The house was dark, except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside. I waited for another sound. For a minute, it was silent. Then I heard a light thump, like something tapping on the wall. I flipped on the hallway light. Nothing. I walked into the kitchen, turning each light on as I went. The object was still on the table. It looked unchanged, sitting there like a rock. I stood still for a few seconds, listening. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the microwave ticked through the seconds. I couldn't hear anything else. My skin felt clammy, and my chest felt tight. I decided to grab a glass of water and try to get back to sleep. The rest of the night was quiet. The next morning, I got ready for work as usual. I kept looking at that object on the table, debating whether to throw it away or keep it. In the end, I decided to leave it alone. I told myself I'd look into it after work. Maybe I'd search online for weird stones or artifacts. Before leaving, I took photos of it on my phone. I figured maybe I'd post them somewhere and see if anyone recognized it. I got home that evening and felt a surge of unease as soon as I turned the key in the lock. The house felt a bit colder than usual. I checked the thermostat, but it read the same temperature as always. I walked into the kitchen and saw the object in the exact same spot, except the bubble wrap and newspaper were scattered across the table as if they'd been moved around. I hadn't touched them that morning. I had left them in a neat pile. My stomach tightened. I wondered if someone had broken in, but the doors were locked and the windows seemed intact. My house isn't big, so I did a quick sweep. I checked every room, closet, and corner. No signs of a break-in. Everything else was in its place. I came back to the kitchen and stood there for a while trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd forgotten that I moved the packing materials. Maybe they slid off the box and somehow rearranged themselves. It didn't make sense, but I tried to convince myself that there was a logical explanation. I made a quick dinner and decided to do some research online. I looked at the photos on my phone and typed keywords like weird stone object, unknown artifact, strange rock with hole. I found nothing conclusive. The hole in the stone reminded me of a handle, but it was too small for my fingers. I zoomed in on the ridges. They looked almost natural, like erosion. But the shape was too odd to be natural. After an hour or so, I got frustrated and gave up. I moved the object to my living room shelf, thinking maybe I'd keep an eye on it while I watched some TV. But the moment I picked it up, a chill went through my body, almost like stepping into an icy breeze. I dropped it for a second, then picked it up again. It felt heavier than before, which made no sense. I placed it on the shelf carefully and sat down on the couch. About halfway through some random sitcom, I heard a noise coming from upstairs. My house has 2 floors, plus a small attic for storage. The noise was a soft creaking sound, like floorboards under slow steps. My throat got tight. I muted the TV and stared at the ceiling. The creaking continued for about 10 seconds. It moved from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. I felt a surge of adrenaline and I jumped up from the couch. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I walked up the stairs, step by step. My heart was pounding, and my palms felt sweaty. The flashlight beam shook in my hand. When I reached the top of the stairs, it was dark. I turned on the hallway light. Everything looked normal. Closed doors to the bathroom and the spare bedroom, and the open door to my master bedroom. I checked each room. Nothing seemed disturbed. The attic hatch is in the hallway ceiling. I looked up, shining the flashlight around the edges. No dust falling, no signs that anyone had pulled it open. I stood there listening. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, but nothing else. After a while, I headed back downstairs. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind kept wandering to the idea that someone was in my attic. In the morning, I felt anxious and decided to work from home. I told my boss I wasn't feeling great. I spent the day trying to concentrate on emails and calls, but I kept glancing at the living room shelf. The object was still there, dark and cold. Around noon, my internet kept cutting out. Each time it happened, I heard a dull tapping noise on the ceiling right above my workstation. I tried to ignore it, but each tap made my spine tingle. After my internet came back, I decided to check the attic once and for all. I grabbed a stepladder from the garage and positioned it under the attic hatch. I pulled down the hatch door. The wooden steps unfolded, creaking the whole way. The smell of old insulation and dust drifted down. I coughed a few times and aimed my flashlight up into the darkness. The attic is cramped with wooden beams and boxes scattered around. I climbed slowly, feeling each rung vibrate under my weight. My flashlight lit up dusty corners, old boxes of holiday decorations, a few suitcases, and a stack of old furniture. Everything looked the same as I remembered. I didn't see footprints or disturbed dust. I walked carefully along the main beam, checking every corner. Nothing. No sign of an intruder. I exhaled, feeling a rush of relief. My nerves were on edge, but at least it looked clear up there. That night, I tried to relax in front of the TV again, but I couldn't focus. Around 9 p.m., the overhead light in the living room flickered twice and went out. I cursed under my breath and got up to check the breaker box. The kitchen light was still on, so it wasn't the entire circuit. I flipped the living room switch back and forth, but the light remained off. I decided to leave it alone for the night. I still had lamps and the rest of the house had power, but I felt uneasy. My heart started beating faster, and I noticed a slight tremor in my hands. I kept glancing at the object on the shelf. I finally picked it up and shoved it into a small drawer in my TV stand. I didn't want to see it anymore. I went to bed around 11 p.m. I was reading emails on my phone when I heard a loud thump overhead. It was directly above my bed, probably in the attic. My chest tightened. I shut off my phone's screen and listened. About 5 seconds passed, then another thump. It sounded like something heavy dropping onto the floorboards. I felt sweat forming at my temples. I got up, grabbed the flashlight again, and hurried into the hallway. I pulled down the attic hatch, and the wooden steps creaked open. This time, I didn't hesitate. I climbed up, heart pounding. The attic was pitch dark except for my flashlight beam. I shone it around quickly. Same boxes, same dusty floor. But then I saw something new near the corner. A small piece of the pink insulation was scattered across the wooden boards, like it had been ripped out of the wall. I moved closer, stepping carefully. I saw a gap in the insulation. It was a hole about the size of my hand. The wood behind it looked scratched up, as if someone had dragged a tool across it. My breathing got shallow. It smelled stale and unpleasant, like old dampness. I tried to peer into the hole, but it was too dark to see much. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I backed away and climbed down, pulling the hatch shut behind me. I went back to my bedroom and locked the door as if that would help. I lay in bed for hours listening for more noises. Everything stayed quiet. In the morning, I called a contractor friend. I asked if he could come by and check the attic. He said he could come next week, but not sooner. I decided to wait. I didn't want to call the cops for something so vague. There was no proof of an intruder, no signs of forced entry, just weird noises and that strange object. My nerves felt frayed. My appetite was gone, and my head felt like it was in a fog. I drank too much coffee and jumped at every little creak the house made. That afternoon, I got fed up and took the object outside. I walked to the backyard and dropped it on the ground near the fence. I left it there. I went back inside, locking the back door. For a moment, I felt lighter. I didn't see that shape in my living room anymore. But around an hour later, I heard a scraping noise near the back door. I froze. The door has a small window, so I walked over and looked through. Nothing. I opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The object was gone from where I'd placed it. The grass was slightly flattened where it had been, but the object wasn't there. My chest started to pound. I looked around the yard, under the porch, behind the trash bins. It was nowhere. My throat felt tight, and my hands shook. I felt a surge of panic, and my mind started racing. Could someone have taken it? Why would anyone do that? I went back in and locked everything, feeling trapped and anxious. That night, I sat on the couch, watching local news with the volume low. I half expected to hear more footsteps or strange noises. Hours passed and nothing happened. I still felt jumpy, but I started to think maybe someone had played a prank on me. Maybe they followed me home that day, left the box, and then snuck into my backyard to grab the object. It was a stretch, but it calmed me down a bit. Around 1 a.m., I finally decided to go to bed. Before heading upstairs, I checked the doors one last time. Everything was locked. I walked up the steps, turned into my bedroom, and stood still. My closet door was open. I always keep it closed. My stomach cramped up. I stepped closer, heart racing, and looked inside. The closet light was off. I didn't see anyone. I reached for the switch on the wall, flicked it on. My clothes were hanging as usual, but then I noticed something on the floor of the closet. I bent down and picked it up. It was the object. The same cold, dark, ridged shape I'd tossed in the backyard. I dropped it again and stumbled backward. My breath caught in my throat, and my hands started to sweat. I felt dizzy. I didn't understand how it got there. I grabbed it, ran downstairs, and tossed it on the kitchen table. My heart was beating so hard that my chest hurt. I backed away from the table. My mind was racing. Could I have brought it back in without remembering? That didn't make sense. I didn't even want to touch it earlier. I paced in the kitchen, rubbing my forehead. I decided to wrap it back up, so I grabbed the bubble wrap from the drawer. As soon as I started covering it, I heard a creaking sound from the ceiling. I looked up. The sound was coming from the attic again, a slow, methodical creak. My hands shook. I finished wrapping the object and stuffed it into the same drawer in the TV stand. Then I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The sound went on for another minute or so, then stopped. I waited, tense, feeling my pulse pound. I didn't hear anything else the rest of the night. For the next 2 days, I avoided opening that drawer. I slept on the couch because I didn't want to go upstairs. I didn't hear much from the attic those nights, just the occasional creak. I tried to ignore it. My contractor friend finally came by on Saturday. He checked the attic thoroughly, looked at the hole in the insulation, and said he didn't see any signs of pests or intruders. No footprints, no droppings, no leftover debris. He patched the hole and replaced the insulation. He told me everything seemed fine. I thanked him, trying not to sound crazy. After he left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at that drawer. I decided to grab the object and lock it in a storage locker downtown. I didn't want it in my house anymore. I found a small duffel bag in the garage, pulled the object out of the drawer, and wrapped it in an old towel. My fingers felt icy when I touched it. My breathing turned shallow. I placed it in the bag, zipped it up, and headed for the door. I heard a faint knocking sound from upstairs, like someone tapping on the attic floor. I ignored it, walked outside, and got into my car. I drove to the storage facility a few miles away. The entire drive, I felt a tightness in my chest. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, expecting to see something in the back seat. Nothing was there. At the storage facility, I rented a small unit. I placed the duffel bag inside, closed the door, locked it, and drove home. When I stepped back into my house, it felt different. The air seemed clearer. No weird noises, no sudden chills. I sat on the couch for a while, scanning the ceiling and the corners of the room. Nothing happened. That night, I slept in my own bed. I still felt on edge, but I didn't hear any thumps or scraping from the attic. For the next few days, things stayed calm. No anonymous packages, no strange occurrences, and no unexplained noises. I tried to go back to my normal routine, yet every once in a while I'd catch myself staring at the TV stand, remembering how I found that thing in my closet. I'd get a surge of anxiety, but it would pass after a minute or two. I didn't know if it was gone for good, or if it would come back. But at least for now, my house seemed quiet again. I'm still not sure why someone sent me that object or how it ended up moving around my house. I don't know if there's some rational explanation for everything that happened. I just know I don't want it near me anymore. Sometimes I think about throwing it in the trash or leaving it in a random field. But it's probably safer locked away. That's where it is now, and I hope it stays there. I haven't gone back to the storage unit to check on it. I have no plans to open that locker. As long as it stays out of my house, I'll try to pretend this whole thing never happened. I don't hear noises in the attic anymore, and I haven't found anything out of place around here. I'm just going to keep living my life one day at a time and hope that object stays where I left it. If it doesn't, I'm not sure what I'll do next. But for now, I'm trying not to think about it. This night messed with my head in a way I never experienced before. I didn't see any flashing lights or hear any unexplainable sounds at first. I just felt something off the moment I pulled over to pick that man up. Everything else after that was like stepping through a dark hallway with no idea what waited around the corner. I've had weird rides before, but this one still makes my spine tighten when I think about it. My shift started like most of my late-night shifts. I drive for a popular ride-hailing app. I've got a routine. I fill my tank around 9 at night, then I cruise the streets looking for requests. My car is a used sedan with seats that squeak a little. The interior smells like cheap car freshener, and there's a little rattle in the back when I hit a bump. That night I was around the more deserted part of town. The streets there are wider, and the streetlights are spaced out, leaving large patches of darkness between each lamp. I wasn't expecting many calls. I got a request around 1 in the morning. The address was pinned a couple of blocks away from me. I checked the name on the app. I can't even remember what it said, but it was some short name, maybe just a single letter. I thought that was weird, but some people like to be private. I made a U-turn and headed for the pickup spot. The roads were empty except for a few cars in the distance. They had their brights on, which made it hard for me to see. My eyes were tired, and the quietness of the hour made me want to yawn. I reached the spot. It was a corner near a closed cafe. The cafe had a metal grate pulled down over the doors, and a weak streetlight flickered nearby. I glanced around to see if anyone was standing there. At first, I didn't see a soul. Then I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed a guy sitting on a low wall by the sidewalk. He looked tall, dressed in dark clothing that made him blend into the background. I signaled with my headlights, wondering if that was my passenger. He stood up slowly. He walked over and opened the back passenger door without saying a word. As he settled into the seat behind me, I looked over my shoulder. I wanted to greet him, ask if he was the one who requested the ride. His face was partially covered by the dim light, but I could make out that he had a blank expression. I asked if he was going to the address in the app. He nodded. I tried to ask a follow-up question, but he didn't respond. Instead, he just reached for the seatbelt. The click of the belt was the only sound I heard from him. I felt an uneasy feeling in my gut, but I told myself it was probably just nerves from being tired. Some people are quiet or just don't like small talk. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The route to his destination was about 10 minutes from where we were. That was enough time to sense that something was off. My shoulders felt tense, my fingers gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I tried putting on some low music, but I realized that might not help. I kept it off so I could hear everything around me. He sat there motionless. I could see him in my rearview mirror. Sometimes he was looking out the window. Other times he seemed to be staring at the back of my seat. I tried clearing my throat and asked if the air conditioning was okay for him. He gave a slight nod, but I didn't hear a word. The closer we got to his destination, the more I felt my heartbeat pick up. Usually silence doesn't bother me this much, but this was different. The atmosphere felt heavy. My chest felt tight. The road looked darker than before, and each streetlight we passed made me more aware of the emptiness around us. I began checking the route on my phone every minute or so. Sometimes the app glitches, or maybe the passenger typed the wrong address, but everything seemed right. The map said we were about a minute away. His address was on a side street off a bigger road. There were no shops or restaurants there, just a row of tall buildings with gated entrances. I slowed down near the intersection, looking at the map to confirm if I should make a left or right. I glanced in the mirror again and saw him lean forward a bit. His eyes were hidden by a shadow. He suddenly spoke. His voice was low and firm. He said, "Stop here." It startled me. I almost jumped because I hadn't heard him speak before. I looked at the screen. We still had maybe 3 or 4 buildings to go, but he insisted, "Stop here." My stomach did a flip, but I did what he said. I put the car in park right next to a street lamp that flickered. There was a long stretch of sidewalk ahead, with some parked cars scattered along the curb. No one else was around. The windows of the buildings were dark. He didn't say goodbye. He just unbuckled his seatbelt. The sound of the belt retracting felt loud in that moment. Then he opened the door and stepped out slowly. I watched him in the rearview mirror. He stood there next to the car for a couple of seconds, then shut the door. I thought maybe he was going to walk away. Instead, he paused there. He stood in place while I waited for him to move. My hand was on the gear shift, ready to drive off once he stepped away. My eyes flicked to the meter on the app. The ride had ended, so I was basically free to go. But I felt like I needed to make sure he was okay. Something about how he just stood there made me uneasy. My pulse was steady, but it felt louder in my ears. I could see the back of his head. His shoulders were slightly hunched forward. Then he turned his head, and it looked like he glanced at me through the window, but I couldn't be sure because the streetlight was so dim. After a few more seconds, I checked my phone to see if I had another ride request. I glanced up again, and he was gone. I blinked. I scanned the side mirror, then the rearview mirror, trying to spot him on the sidewalk. It didn't make sense. He couldn't have walked off that fast. We were on a long stretch of road with no alleys nearby. The gates to the buildings were locked, and there weren't any open entrances. It was like he'd vanished. My heart pounded so hard I felt my shirt moving with each beat. I kept telling myself that maybe he ducked behind one of the parked cars or stepped into a dark doorway. But I rolled down my window and listened for footsteps. I heard nothing. I stepped out of my car. The street was still. The sidewalk was empty in both directions. The only sounds came from a distant hum of a generator, or maybe an air conditioning unit. I walked a few yards toward the parked cars, looking between them. I saw nothing but damp pavement and some scattered trash. My breath felt shallow. My mind was racing, trying to figure out where he could have gone. I stared up at the buildings. All the windows were dark. No curtains moved. No lights turned on. There was nowhere he could have disappeared that fast without making a noise. I got back in my car and locked the doors. I felt my hands shaking when I grabbed the wheel. I didn't drive off immediately. I kept looking around, checking my mirrors, waiting for some sign of him. Maybe he was playing a prank. Maybe he was hiding behind a corner, watching me. The idea of that made my chest feel tight. I realized my mouth was dry, so I reached for my water bottle. I could barely swallow. After a minute or two, I thought maybe I should just leave. I put the car in drive and started moving. My headlights cut through the darkness ahead, but I didn't see any sign of him. I made a right at the end of the block, hoping to spot him on the adjacent street. Nothing. The sidewalk was just as empty. The buildings were all silent. I tried to keep calm, telling myself that maybe the guy was just fast, or maybe he lived in one of those units and had a key to a side entrance. But in my gut, I knew something wasn't adding up. I checked the app. There was no new message, no follow-up from the passenger. The trip was completed. That was it. I decided to pull over into a gas station a few blocks away. I needed to clear my head. The station was one of those self-service spots with bright fluorescent lights. No one was around except a bored cashier looking at his phone inside the store. I parked near the pump, but didn't get out. I just sat there, thinking about what happened. My left leg was bouncing from nerves. I forced myself to take a few slow breaths. I tried to replay the steps in my head. I arrived, he got in, didn't talk, except once. Then he left and vanished. I opened the ride history in my app. The passenger's name was there, along with the drop-off location. Everything seemed normal. The fare was a few dollars, nothing unusual. I stared at the screen, half expecting some glitch or error message, but everything looked fine. The only odd thing was that I had a strong feeling that I hadn't just had a normal passenger. The idea of having some explanation felt more comforting, but I couldn't come up with one that made sense. After a few minutes, I took a sip of water, wiped my face with my hand, and started to drive again. I told myself I'd do one more ride before heading home. I needed to push the weirdness away and keep working. As I pulled out of the gas station, my phone buzzed with another request. It was close by, so I accepted. I drove to the pickup, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that man. The sense of unease followed me. Every time I saw a person standing on the sidewalk, I'd do a double take, wondering if it was him. But it never was. I completed that next ride without any trouble. The passenger was a chatty guy who smelled like cigarettes. He complained about the time and about something at his workplace. I nodded along, but my mind was somewhere else. My memory kept going back to the previous passenger's face or what little I saw of it. I thought about his stillness, his silence, the short order he gave me. "Stop here." Those words kept echoing in my head. After I dropped off that second passenger, I decided I was done for the night. I drove home. My home is a small apartment with thin walls and a shaky elevator. I parked in my usual spot in the underground garage. The lights in the garage gave everything a dull yellow color. Usually I feel safe once I'm under the fluorescent lights, but that night I kept glancing over my shoulder. I got in the elevator and pressed my floor number. My reflection stared back at me in the metal doors. I could see sweat on my forehead and my eyes looked wide. I locked my apartment door behind me and immediately double-checked it. My living room was dark. I usually have a small lamp on a timer, but it must have burned out. I tossed my keys on the table and turned on the overhead light. The brightness stung my eyes. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. My heart was still beating faster than normal. I put my phone to charge and walked to the window. Outside, the street below was mostly empty, just a couple of parked cars and a stray cat rummaging in some trash. Everything looked normal, everything looked boring even. But I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. I tried to sleep that night. I crawled into bed, turned off the light, and closed my eyes. But every time I started drifting, I'd jerk awake, picturing that man's face in my mind. I saw his expressionless stare, I heard the click of his seatbelt, and I remembered him standing by the car door. I kept wondering how someone could just vanish like that. The fact that I had no explanation put me on edge. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy. I checked my phone and saw a handful of rides completed from the previous night. The one ride that stuck out was his. I opened it and tapped the support section, half thinking I'd report something. But what would I say? That my passenger disappeared into thin air? The company would think I was out of my mind. I backed out of the screen and just stared at the ride history for a while. Then I shut off the app and tried to go about my day. I convinced myself that I needed a break. Usually I start driving in the late afternoon and go until after midnight. But that day I decided to stay home, watch something mindless on TV, and try not to think about the night before. I made some sandwiches in my tiny kitchen. I tried to act normal, but I felt this strange paranoia. Every time I heard a noise in the hallway, I'd pause and listen. My body was on alert for no reason I could logically explain. It was that same uneasy feeling I got when I was driving him. It was like a weight on my chest. By the evening, I realized I wasn't going to feel better until I went out for a drive again. I thought facing the city might help me calm down. I set out around 8, still feeling that twist in my stomach. I drove to my usual gas station, filled up, and then turned on the app. For a while, it was a normal shift. People were going to bars or heading home from some event. I tried to focus on the routine of picking them up, making small talk, dropping them off. The city lights blurred by my windows, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the strange passenger. Around midnight, I decided to call it a night. But before I could go offline, I got one last request. The pickup was in the same area where I'd found him the night before. I stared at the screen for a second. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to go back there. But I also thought maybe this would be a chance to confirm I was just overreacting. So I accepted the ride. I drove toward that area, watching the street signs pass under the dull glow of the lamps. My palms were moist on the wheel. The app told me to turn onto that same street corner with the closed cafe. My heart pounded. The cafe was closed again, of course. The street was empty except for a single flickering light overhead. I slowed down and looked around for a passenger. It was dead quiet. No one was there. I rolled down my window and called out, "Hello? Anyone here for a ride?" My voice sounded shaky. Nothing, just silence and the buzz of the flickering lamp. I canceled the ride. My phone asked me if I was sure. I clicked, yes. Then I drove away, my eyes scanning the mirrors. I felt a chill run through my arms. It was the same corner, the same dark atmosphere. But this time, no one appeared. After that, I turned off the app. I just wanted to go home. On my drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see someone in the back seat. Obviously, it was empty, but the feeling wouldn't go away. My mind raced with questions. I had no clue what happened that night. All I know is that I picked up a man who barely spoke, drove him almost to his destination, and then he disappeared before my eyes. I didn't see him enter a building. I didn't hear him run off. He was just gone. I still drive for the app. I've shared my story with a couple of friends, and they always give me the same look, like they're not sure if I'm messing with them or if I'm losing it. I can't prove anything. I have the record of the trip, but that doesn't explain how he disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if I just imagined it, but then I remember the details too clearly. I remember his quiet presence in the back seat, my own pounding heart, and the way he just vanished on that lonely street. I try not to dwell on it too much because it gives me this tightness in my chest. But every night when I drive, I check the pickup details carefully. Whenever I see a single-letter name or a location near that street, I feel my skin crawl. I keep telling myself it's nothing. I keep telling myself people come and go, and maybe he's just someone who knows that neighborhood like the back of his hand. But deep down, I'm not convinced. There was something there that I can't explain. And I can't shake that uneasy feeling whenever I remember how he got out of my car, looked around for a moment, and then vanished into the empty street. I remember the day I first walked along those abandoned tracks. I was out there to do a routine inspection, but nothing about the place felt routine to me. The air tasted stale, and the old ties were warped and cracked under my boots. I'd been hired to check the condition of a disused section of railroad line slated for possible restoration. People said it was quiet out there, not much to see, just rusted rails and rotting wood. But the moment I set foot on that gravel, something felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the silence or the lack of any recent footprints. Maybe it was the feeling of being watched. Either way, I kept going, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest and that nagging sense that I wasn't alone. My name is Tom. I've worked as a railroad inspector for 7 years. I've seen all kinds of tracks in all sorts of conditions: flooded lines, collapsed tunnels, overgrown routes that barely resembled railways anymore. I don't usually scare easily because I know what to expect. I know which rails might give way and which sections might be riddled with cracks. I know how to handle wild animals that sometimes roam near the tracks. But I'd never dealt with a situation like this one. It started out like any ordinary assignment. Then I felt eyes on me, and that changed everything. The day began around 6 a.m. I drove my pickup out to the old rail yard on the west side of the county. The sun was barely up, but I like to start early. I parked near a rusted signal tower and walked about a mile to get to the actual section I needed to inspect. The area looked deserted, and the rails were partly covered with dirt and scattered leaves. A faint smell of wet wood drifted around me. I carried a small backpack with my usual tools: a wrench, a track gauge, some chalk, and a flashlight. I also brought a bottle of water and a protein bar. I started my inspection in a methodical way, just like I'd been trained. I walked from one tie to the next, checking for obvious signs of decay. I poked around for loose bolts and took a few notes. The morning air was still cold, and I could see my breath every time I exhaled. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. No birds called, and no wind blew through the nearby trees. I noticed the first odd thing about half an hour into my checks. I felt a slight prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like I do when someone stares at me. I spun around, expecting to see some random person or maybe an animal, but I didn't see anything. The rails stretched behind me, bent and dusty, with rows of weeds pushing up between the ties. There were a few short trees, a rusty old sign that used to warn trains to slow down, and nothing else. I shrugged it off and kept working, but I felt unsettled. About 10 minutes later, I heard a soft sound behind me, like gravel shifting. I spun around again. Standing about 100 yards away was a man. He was tall and slim, dressed in a dark jacket and jeans. He had a scruffy beard, and his hair looked unkempt. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there looking in my direction. At least, I think he was looking at me. I couldn't see his eyes clearly from that distance. My heart thumped in my chest. I wondered if he was another inspector or maybe a trespasser. Sometimes people come out to these abandoned tracks to explore or take photos. I raised my hand and called out, "Hey, you need something?" My voice echoed in the quiet, but the man didn't respond. I waited a few seconds, feeling the tension rise in my gut. Then I decided to keep going. I'd done my due diligence by asking. If he wanted to approach, he could. If he didn't, fine. I had a job to do. I tried to focus on my inspection, but I couldn't get rid of that queasy feeling in my stomach. Every so often I glanced over my shoulder. He was still there, standing in the same spot. I felt a sense of unease, like he was waiting. After a few more measurements, I stood up and turned around fully. I was about to say something else to the guy, but he was closer than before. He'd moved maybe 20 yards forward without me hearing him. He was still silent, hands at his sides, face unreadable. That sight made my scalp tingle. I considered approaching him, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he stood too still, or the way he just stared without speaking. I decided to move along the tracks, figuring he might be a curious drifter. I walked another 200 yards, pausing every so often to check the condition of the rails. My boots knocked against loose ties, and some of them felt spongy underfoot. I jotted notes in my small notepad. The whole time I tried to ignore the man. Eventually I glanced back and he was still there, following me, but at a slow pace. He seemed to close the distance a little each time I stopped. I felt sweat bead on my forehead, despite the cool air. I wasn't sure if I should confront him or just keep going. I decided I'd had enough. I turned fully and shouted, "Hey buddy, you lost or something?" My voice sounded shaky to me. The man didn't speak. He just stood there, maybe 30 yards away now. I could see his expression, but it was blank. No smile, no frown, nothing. He blinked a few times and then took a step forward. That's all. One step. It made my pulse race. I weighed my options. I could call the local authorities, but I wasn't sure what I'd say. A silent man is following me on the tracks? I didn't even get any direct threat from him, just this weird sense of menace. I decided to keep walking, but faster. I looked for a path that branched off from the main track. Sometimes these old lines have service roads that run parallel. I found a narrow dirt path about 50 yards ahead. I headed toward it, my backpack slung over my shoulder, my hand sweaty around my notepad. The crunch of gravel felt louder than ever, and I kept hearing my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I kept glancing back. Each time, the man was a bit closer. At one point, he was only 10 yards away, and I still never heard his footsteps. He wasn't running, which was odd. It was like he could glide forward without making a sound. Every time I looked behind me, he was there, closer than the last time, always watching me. My head felt light, and I realized I was breathing too fast. I tried to calm myself. I'm not usually a jumpy guy, but something about this made my skin crawl. I broke into a brisk walk, then a jog. My backpack bounced against my lower back. The path led around a gentle curve to the right. I could see some old equipment sheds in the distance, and I hoped I might be able to duck inside one to get my bearings. I risked another look behind me. The man was right at the curve. He was maybe 6 yards away now. I could see the color of his jacket more clearly. Dark blue or black, can't say for sure, but it looked worn. He still had no expression, just a blank stare and that same slow pace. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak again, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to yell at him to back off, but the words wouldn't come. My instincts told me to keep moving. I reached the equipment sheds and found that the doors were locked with chains. A wave of frustration hit me, but I wasn't ready to give up. I turned around, determined to confront him face to face, but he was gone. I looked along the path, back toward the main rails across the yard. Nothing. The place was empty. I even jogged a few steps back, trying to see if he was hiding behind a bush or a stack of old ties. No movement, no sound. He'd vanished. That unsettled me more than if he'd been standing right in front of me. My thoughts raced. Had he slipped away into the woods? Was I imagining things? But I knew I wasn't. I'd seen him up close. I'd heard the gravel shift under his feet, or at least I thought I had. My adrenaline was running high. I wiped sweat off my forehead and tried to catch my breath. The sheds around me looked abandoned with rust on the corrugated metal walls. I heard a distant buzz of insects, but nothing else. No sign of the man. I didn't want to linger there, but I still had part of my job to finish. I decided to complete the inspection as quickly as possible and then head back. My mind was all over the place, but I managed to scribble a few final notes on my notepad. Rails cracked near mile marker 14. Ties rotten in multiple spots. Possible sabotage? I didn't think there was any sabotage, but I was jumpy. I took a different route back, a rough trail that led around the opposite side of the yard. I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see that man step out at any moment. My teeth were clenched and my neck felt stiff. Every sound made me flinch, from the crunch of my own boots to the rustle of branches overhead. After about 15 minutes, I found my way to a crossing that led back to my truck. I spotted the old signal tower in the distance, the one I'd parked near. Relief washed over me at the thought of getting inside my pickup and driving away. When I got to the truck, I tossed my backpack onto the passenger seat and locked the doors right away, even before starting the engine. I took a moment to breathe, hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart still hammering. Then I started the truck and pulled out, heading back down the dirt road toward the main highway. On the way, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see the man's face pop up in the back seat or appear on the road behind me. But I saw no one. That night I had trouble sleeping. I replayed the incident in my mind, trying to figure out who that guy could have been. Was he just a homeless person wandering around? Was he an old track worker who'd lost his mind out there? Or was he something else entirely? My body reacted each time I pictured him, my hair standing on end. I felt silly for being so spooked, but I couldn't deny that it had rattled me. My heart would pound, and I'd break into a cold sweat just remembering how close he'd gotten. The next morning, I reported to my supervisor, Mike, and gave him my inspection notes. I almost mentioned the man, but I stopped myself. I didn't want Mike to think I was scared of some random vagrant. I also didn't have any solid evidence. The man had disappeared. There was nothing to prove he'd even been there. Maybe I had a mild hallucination, or maybe I was dehydrated. My notes were normal, nothing out of the ordinary except for the track's poor condition. A week later, Mike told me I had to go back out there. He said management needed a more detailed look at a specific stretch near the mile marker I'd noted. I felt my stomach tighten at the thought of returning, but I didn't want to show it. I agreed, hoping the second visit would go smoothly. I prepared by bringing more water, a radio, and a friend. Carl, another inspector who often teamed up with me on big jobs. I never told Carl about the man. I just said I wanted a second pair of eyes. We drove out together on a clear morning. The sky was bright, and the sun felt warm. It was a better day than my last visit, at least on the surface. When we reached the same abandoned line, I forced a casual tone. "Let's split up," I said. "We can cover more ground." Carl agreed. He took the section near the crossing, and I headed back to the area where I'd first seen the man. As I walked, I noticed my nerves kicking in. My breath got shallow, and I kept touching my radio, checking that it was on and working. The rails looked the same as before, rusted, with weeds snaking around the ties. The air felt still. I glanced all around, searching for any figure in a dark jacket, but I saw nothing. Birds chirped this time, which was a slight comfort. I told myself it was just a normal day. Nothing weird would happen. About an hour in, I heard footsteps behind me. I whirled around fast, my heart hammering. It was just Carl. He'd finished his part and come to see how I was doing. I tried not to let him see how jumpy I was. We walked together for a while, exchanging a few words about the track's condition. But soon, Carl said he was going to check a junction box near the far end. I watched him walk away, feeling alone again. I continued my inspection, scanning the rails and measuring gauge where needed. Then I felt that prickling sensation on my neck again. I froze. My ears rang with silence, except for my pulse thudding. Slowly, I turned around. The man was there, off in the distance, standing near a broken rail switch. He looked exactly the same. Dark jacket, jeans, beard, expressionless face. My stomach lurched. I swallowed hard, trying not to panic. I glanced around, hoping Carl was still nearby, but I didn't see him. The man took a step toward me, silent as ever. I fiddled with my radio, pressing the button. "Carl, you there?" My voice shook. I heard static, but no immediate answer. The man took another step. I called out, "Carl, can you hear me?" More static. My hand felt slippery against the radio. I tried to calm my breathing. Then the man took 2 more steps. He was about 30 yards away. I shouted, "Hey, hold on a minute." He didn't stop. I weighed my options. I could run, but I knew he could close the distance somehow. I didn't want to lead him to Carl. So I stood there, my legs shaky, waiting for him to get closer. He moved with that same quiet stride, eyes locked on me. 20 yards now. My throat felt dry. I could see the dirt on his jacket, like he'd been sleeping on the ground. His face had a few days of stubble. His eyes looked strangely empty. No visible emotion. I tried to speak, but all I managed was a weak, "Who are you?" He kept coming, now 15 yards away. I started walking backward, my boots crunching on the gravel. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I flicked on my flashlight even though it was daytime, just to have something in my hand. I aimed the beam at him, hoping it would do something. It didn't. He stepped closer, now maybe 10 yards away. I could see the slight twitch of his fingers. I could hear my own panting breaths. Then he stopped. He stared at me for a moment. My radio crackled to life. Carl's voice. "Tom, you called me? I'm at the junction box. Everything okay?" I tried to respond, but the words caught in my throat. The man was 5 yards away. I could see a faint scar on his cheek. He raised one hand slowly, as if reaching out. Then my radio crackled again. "Tom, answer me." I found my voice shouting, "Carl, get over here." At that sound, the man's hand dropped to his side. He stepped back, almost like he was startled by the noise. My radio hissed. "Where are you?" Carl asked. I forced myself to speak calmly. "I'm near the broken switch, about half a mile from the yard. I need you here now." The man stared at me for another second. Then, just like before, he turned to the side and walked around the curve of the tracks. He vanished behind a pile of old ties, as though he melted into the landscape. I stood there stunned, trying to catch my breath. My limbs were shaking, and my chest felt tight. I was sure Carl would show up any second, but it took him a few minutes. When he finally arrived, I was alone. He found me standing in the middle of the tracks, flashlight clutched in my hand, sweat pouring down my face. "What happened?" Carl asked, looking concerned. "There was a guy," I said, my voice trembling. "He was right here, following me. Then he disappeared." Carl looked around, checking the surrounding area. "I don't see anyone. Maybe it was a worker from somewhere nearby." I shook my head. "No, I've seen him before, last week. He never says anything. He just stands there, getting closer." Carl frowned. "That's weird, man. Let's finish up and go." We did a quick wrap-up of our inspection, staying close together the whole time. Every rustle of leaves made my heart rate jump, but the man didn't appear again. Eventually, we walked back to the truck. I was shaky the entire drive home. Carl kept asking questions, but I didn't have real answers. I only knew what I'd seen and how it made me feel. My body had never felt so tense, and I couldn't get the image of him vanishing around that curve out of my head. I still don't know who he is or why he was out there. I've heard rumors from other workers that people sometimes hang around old tracks, but nobody has reported someone like him. Silent, always closer each time you look, then gone in a blink. Part of me wants to go back and figure it out, but another part of me never wants to see those abandoned rails again. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. And every time I think about hearing footsteps behind me, I feel that same rush of panic. I haven't found any logical explanation. Maybe there isn't one. In the months since, I've asked other inspectors if they've ever run into a tall man in a dark jacket out on old rail lines. Some say no. Others shrug and say they've heard stories of strange people wandering abandoned sites. Nobody has a clear story that matches mine, though. I try to tell myself it's over, that I won't see him again. But sometimes when I'm alone on a new assignment, I find myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that blank face just a few yards away. I don't know if he's real, or if something in that place made me see things. But I felt his presence, and I can't forget it. I'm still doing my job. I can't exactly quit over this, and I don't have a good reason to file a formal complaint. But I've asked not to be assigned to that section again. Management hasn't argued because I gave them the data they needed, and they moved on to other projects. Life goes on, but that experience sticks with me. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard footsteps in the hallway, only to find nothing there. I go out to the living room, check the doors, glance out the window at the street. No one is there, but my heart takes a while to slow down. I've tried to tell a friend about this, but he thought I was messing with him, trying to tell a ghost story. I wish I could shrug it off that easily. It wasn't a ghost story. It felt real. It still feels real. I know what I saw. I know how my body reacted. And I know the dread that swelled in my chest when that man stood just a few yards away. He was real, or at least he seemed real. If I ever see him again, I don't know if I'll have the courage to stand there. I might just run as fast as I can and not look back. For now, I keep going, checking tracks in other parts of the state. I try to focus on the present. I measure rails, test ties, and fill out forms. But when the air goes still and the wind stops, I remember that day. I remember the way he moved closer each time I turned around, and the way he vanished on that final curve without a sound. And I feel that same chill prickling up my spine. I'll probably never get a clear explanation. I just know I'm not in a hurry to see those abandoned tracks again. And if I do, I'll make sure I'm not alone. I moved into this old house about 2 months ago. It looked decent on the outside and needed some cosmetic work on the inside, but it was priced below market value. I figured I could fix it up on weekends, maybe repaint some walls, change the fixtures, and gradually turn it into a comfortable place. Everything felt normal during the first few weeks. The plumbing was a little noisy, and the windows creaked in the wind sometimes, but it seemed like regular old house quirks. I wasn't too worried. A few days ago, though, something shifted. I was watching TV in the living room on a Friday night when I heard a dull thumping sound. It was faint, and I thought maybe I was imagining it. The house can make strange noises at night. Wood settling, pipes rattling, that kind of thing. But the thumping sounded more deliberate. It had a rhythm, like someone was pushing against a wall or floorboard repeatedly. I paused the show and turned the volume down. My heart thumped a bit harder, and I felt a tingling in my stomach. I told myself it was probably the old furnace kicking in. Then I heard a quieter, scraping sound, almost like something sliding across concrete. It was coming from the basement. I'd only been down in the basement once before, right after I signed the closing papers. I remember it smelled musty, like stale air, and the light fixtures were old and barely lit the room. The previous owner had mentioned there was some junk left behind, but I never took a close look. I left it for later because I was more focused on unpacking and fixing up the living areas. When I heard the scraping that night, I grabbed a small flashlight from the kitchen drawer and decided to check it out. As I headed to the basement door, which is in the hallway between the living room and the kitchen, I felt a small wave of dread. My neck felt tight, and my back tingled with tension. I opened the door and flipped the light switch at the top of the steps. Only one of the 2 bulbs down there still worked, so the basement was half lit, casting long shadows across the walls. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. I felt the draft of cold air and picked up a slight odor of damp concrete. At the bottom of the steps, I noticed the floor had patches of old, peeling paint. I also saw several cardboard boxes, some of them ripped, and a few old pieces of furniture covered in dusty sheets. The place felt neglected. My flashlight revealed spiderwebs in the corners. The scraping sound had stopped by the time I reached the bottom. I stood there holding the flashlight in front of me, trying to catch any sign of movement. There was nothing. It was quiet. I listened for maybe 30 seconds, and all I heard was the hum of the furnace and my own breathing. My mouth felt dry. I looked around, stepping carefully past some broken chairs and a stack of old magazines. That's when I noticed a trunk in the far corner. It was a big wooden trunk with metal hinges and a rusty padlock that looked half broken. The trunk's edges were chipped and it had weird stains on the wood. Something about it felt wrong to me. I can't explain it. It just felt off. But I didn't see anything else that could have caused the noise. I figured maybe something shifted inside one of the boxes, or maybe a piece of junk fell over on its own. I walked over to the trunk, mostly out of curiosity. When I got close, I noticed a strange smell. It was faint but sour, like old metal mixed with mold. The padlock was hanging loosely, so I could lift the lid without even breaking it. Part of me wanted to walk away, but I was already there, so I braced myself and flipped the lid open. Inside, there were several odd items. One was a small cloth pouch. Another was a pair of old gloves that looked like they were stiff from age. I saw some pieces of dried herbs or plants. I'm not sure what they were. They were tied together with twine. There was also a broken mirror, about the size of my hand. The edges were jagged and it felt cold to the touch. Beneath those things, I found a heavy book. The cover had some kind of symbol carved into it. The pages looked yellowed, and they smelled musty. I felt a jolt of unease in my chest. This stuff looked macabre, like something used in weird rituals or something. I'm not into that kind of thing, and I definitely didn't want to know more about it at that moment. I closed the trunk. My hands felt cold, and the hair on the back of my neck prickled. I decided I didn't need to deal with that right then and there. I headed back upstairs, locked the basement door, and told myself it was just old junk. Someone's bizarre hobby, maybe. It wasn't my concern. I tried to brush it off. For the next day or two, I tried to ignore the memory of that trunk. I focused on my normal routine. I went grocery shopping, did some cleaning, watched some TV shows. But at night, I noticed the house felt different. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing on my shoulders. The usual creak sounded sharper. My nerves were frayed, and I couldn't relax. On Sunday evening, as I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I heard a quiet knock from somewhere near the hallway. It was just one knock. I froze, toothbrush in my mouth, and listened. Nothing. Then, another knock. 3 seconds later. My heart started to race. I looked out into the hallway, but it was dark. The only light was from the bathroom behind me. I turned the hall light on, but I saw nothing out of place. I reminded myself that old houses can make weird noises, but this sounded too much like someone tapping. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about the trunk. I wondered if I should just throw it out, or maybe see if there was anything valuable inside. But every time that thought came up, I felt a tightness in my stomach. I felt like I should leave it alone, but ignoring it made me anxious too. I tossed and turned, and by 3 a.m., I was still awake. At some point, I swear I heard a floorboard squeak outside my bedroom door, but I was too exhausted to get up and check. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up late and rushed to get to work. While brushing my hair in front of the bedroom mirror, I heard a scraping sound from the living room. It was soft but distinct. I went to check and saw nothing. The living room was in the same state I left it. Couch, coffee table, boxes of books I hadn't unpacked yet. I shrugged it off, told myself I was just on edge. I left for work, trying to forget about it. I came home that evening, and the house felt quiet. Almost too quiet. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and opened the fridge. As I reached for a soda, I heard a metallic clink somewhere behind me. I turned around and saw the basement door. The handle was jiggling slightly. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer. It stopped. The air felt colder in that part of the house. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and I stood there staring at the door, waiting to see if it would move again. After a few moments, nothing happened. My rational mind told me it could be a draft or a loose latch. So I checked the latch. It seemed fine. I opened the door to see if there was any breeze, but the basement was dark and still. I shut the door again, trying to stay calm. That night, I decided to secure the basement door with a bolt from the hardware store. I installed it myself. It was simple enough, a metal slide bolt that I could lock from the kitchen side. I felt better once it was in place. I ate a frozen pizza and tried to watch a movie. I didn't hear anything for the rest of the evening. I went to bed around midnight feeling a bit more at ease. Around 2 a.m. I was yanked out of sleep by a loud clang. I shot upright in bed, heart racing, and listened. My room was dark except for the glow from a streetlight through the window. The clang came again. It sounded like metal against concrete. I realized it was coming from below, maybe the basement. My entire body tensed. I slid out of bed, threw on some sweats, and grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. My hands were shaking. I noticed my breath was shaky too, almost panting. I walked down the hall, through the living room, and into the kitchen. The new bolt on the basement door was unlocked, even though I remembered locking it. My chest felt tight. I reached out and touched the bolt, confirming it was slid open. My mouth went dry. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt constricted. I opened the basement door slowly. The light switch was on the wall, and I flicked it, but the old bulb below popped and went out. Now the basement was pitch black. I had my flashlight, so I clicked it on and shone it down the stairs. Nothing moved. I took a step onto the first stair, and it creaked so loudly that I almost jumped. I forced myself to keep going, gripping the railing. Another clang echoed from somewhere near the far wall. I aimed the flashlight in that direction. The trunk was still there in the corner, closed. I scanned the room. I saw the dusty furniture, the scattered boxes, the old tools on a workbench. Then I saw something new. A small metal object lying near the trunk, like it had been tossed there. I inched closer, careful with each step. It looked like a bent screwdriver or a short metal rod. I didn't recognize it. I reached down to pick it up, and as soon as I touched it, I heard a soft rustling behind me. I spun around, shining the light in every direction. Nothing. My legs felt weak, and I noticed I was sweating. The trunk looked exactly the same as before, but I kept thinking about how the lock was basically broken. I wondered if maybe something inside had shifted. I approached it again, feeling a cold sweat on my neck. My pulse pounded. I reached out and lifted the lid. Everything inside looked mostly the same. The gloves, the pouch, the dried plants, the broken mirror, the strange book. But the book was open. I was sure I had left it closed. A few pages had been turned, almost as if someone had flipped through it. I saw weird handwritten notes in the margins. I couldn't read the text right then, though. My hands were trembling too much to focus. I closed the book and shut the trunk again, more forcefully this time. Then I practically sprinted up the stairs, slammed the door behind me, and slid the bolt shut. I felt a chill all over my body. That night, I only slept for a few hours. I kept waking up to every creak and pop in the walls. The next morning, I went to work feeling exhausted. At my desk, I couldn't focus on anything. All I kept thinking about was that trunk and the possibility that someone or something was in my basement. It sounded crazy, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My back hurt from tension and my stomach was in knots. By the time I got home, I decided I needed to do something drastic. I wanted to throw out that trunk and everything in it. I didn't care if it was historical or worth anything. I just wanted it gone. I got my work gloves, a couple trash bags, and a big plastic bin. When I tried to open the basement door, the bolt was unlocked again. My heart sank. I was sure I had locked it. I took a deep breath and opened the door, flashlight in hand. I flipped the basement light switch, but the bulb was still dead, so I descended into darkness again. My steps were slow and deliberate. My legs felt shaky, like they didn't want to move. I reached the bottom and swept the flashlight around. Nothing jumped out at me. I walked over to the trunk. I was about to shove it into the plastic bin, but I realized it was heavier than I expected. I popped the lid open. The book was gone. The gloves, pouch, and herbs were there, but the book was missing. My skin crawled. I looked around frantically, shining the beam of light over the floor and around the boxes. I didn't see it anywhere. A wave of fear hit me, and I felt my stomach turn. I grabbed the trunk and dragged it toward the stairs. It scraped along the concrete, making a horrible screech that echoed in the basement. Once I reached the stairs, I realized there was no way I could haul it up by myself without emptying it first. I tossed the contents into the plastic bin and left the trunk behind, deciding I'd come back for it. I carried the bin up the stairs, set it on the kitchen floor, and slammed the basement door shut again. Then I locked it, slid the bolt, and pushed a heavy chair in front of it. My hands were sweaty and my shirt stuck to my back. I took the bin outside, walked to the back of the house, and opened the lid of my trash can. I dumped everything in, let the lid slam shut, and took a step back. My heart was racing, and my mind was whirling with relief, but also with anxiety. That book was still unaccounted for. I decided I'd deal with the empty trunk later, maybe tomorrow. I went back inside, but the house felt tense. The air felt cold, and I noticed the living room lights flickered once, then went back to normal. I went around turning on every light, like that would somehow make me feel safer. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a loud thud from the basement door area. I jumped up, nearly dropping my phone. I walked over, hearing my heartbeat in my ears. The chair I'd wedged against the door had been pushed aside, and the bolt was once again unlocked. The door stood half an inch open. My first thought was that someone was inside. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone again. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and approached the door slowly. I yanked it open, flicked on the flashlight app on my phone, and shined it down the stairs. The trunk wasn't at the bottom anymore. It was moved a few feet to the left. My stomach turned to ice. I yelled out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. No answer. I started breathing fast and shallow. My palms were clammy and my pulse was racing. I backed away from the stairs, slammed the door, slid the bolt, and called the local police. I told them I thought there was an intruder in my basement. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later. I explained everything as calmly as I could. They went down with their flashlights, checked the basement thoroughly, and found no one. They radioed to see if there were any signs of forced entry outside or around the property. There were none. They told me they couldn't find anything suspicious besides the basement's disarray. They asked if it was possible I'd forgotten to lock the bolt. I insisted I hadn't. They looked unconvinced. They told me to call them if anything else happened. After they left, the house felt emptier than ever. I locked every door and window, checked each room twice, and finally crashed on my bed. I stayed in my clothes, too rattled to change. I stared at the ceiling for hours. Every tiny noise made me jump. Eventually, I must have drifted off because I opened my eyes to pale morning light. My neck ached, and my mouth felt dry. I sat up, rubbed my face, and forced myself to get moving. I went back to the basement that afternoon in full daylight, hoping it would feel less intimidating. I brought my flashlight, a hammer, and a crowbar, thinking maybe I'd pry the trunk apart and toss it in pieces. But when I got downstairs, the trunk was gone. The entire thing was missing. I searched every corner, moved boxes, looked behind the shelves. Nothing. My skin felt clammy and my heart pounded in my chest. I thought maybe I'd lost my mind. Could someone have stolen it? That made no sense. Why would they only take a trunk? I walked around the basement in circles for about 15 minutes, trying to see if it was hidden or if there was any other explanation. I found a set of dusty footprints that led toward the far corner, but they stopped at the wall. There was no door there, just cracked concrete. I felt dizzy. I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I locked the basement door from the kitchen side, made sure all the other doors and windows were locked too, and just left the house. I got in my car and drove around for a while, trying to clear my head. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept seeing that trunk in my head, and those strange objects. and the missing book. Eventually, I parked at a coffee shop and sat there for an hour, not really tasting my drink, just feeling numb. When I returned, it was early evening. I stepped inside and listened. The house felt still. The lights were as I'd left them. I checked the basement door. It was shut and locked. The chair was still pushed in front of it. I breathed a sigh of relief. I went to the living room, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV for background noise. I tried to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting to the basement. My shoulders were tense and my back ached from stress. It's been like this for a few days now. I haven't heard any more banging or scraping, but I still feel uneasy. Sometimes I think I hear faint murmurs, almost like whispering, but it might be the wind or the pipes. I've checked the trash can out back, and everything I threw out is gone, taken by the garbage truck. I still don't know what happened to that book. I still don't know who or what moved that trunk. Every night I lock every door and window. I slide the bolt on the basement door and push the chair against it. Every morning, it's still locked, which makes me feel slightly better. But I can't shake the sensation that I'm being watched. It's a strange, prickling feeling in the back of my neck. Sometimes I'll be in the kitchen, making a sandwich, and I'll feel like there's a presence behind me. I'll spin around, but no one's there. I haven't told any of my friends or coworkers the full story. I just say I have a rodent problem, or that the house is making weird noises. I don't want them to think I'm losing it. I'm not sure how long I can keep this up, though. My sleep is messed up and my nerves are fried. I'm considering moving out, but I put so much money into buying this place that I can't easily walk away. For now, I'm just trying to carry on. I keep the basement locked at all times, and I try not to go down there unless it's absolutely necessary. I still have some boxes to unpack, but they can wait. Sometimes late at night, I'll hear a faint knock or a soft scraping, and my heart will pound so loud I can hardly stand it. I sit there, waiting for something else to happen, but it usually stops after a few seconds. Then it's just me in the silence. My body stays tense for hours afterward. I don't know if there's something in this house with me, or if it's all in my head. I just know I can't forget the sight of that open trunk and that missing book, and I can't forget how the lock on the basement door kept unlocking itself. It's like the house is alive in some small, unsettling way. I'm not sure if things will get worse or if they'll calm down eventually. Right now, I'm just living day by day, trying not to let the fear consume me. I keep the lights on, I double-check the locks, and I try to sleep with one ear open. It's not much of a plan, but it's the only one I've got. I pulled into the gravel driveway around 4 in the afternoon. My rental car rattled over a few loose stones, and the sound made me uneasy right away. The winery looked quiet, with a low, faded sign near a couple of tall cypress trees. I remember stepping out of the car and feeling the sudden drop in temperature. It wasn't freezing, but the air felt sharper than it had an hour earlier. The building sat at the end of a dirt path. It was 2 stories high, built from dark wood with a slanted roof. I spotted a few barrels stacked near the side, but I didn't see anyone around. I glanced at my phone and noticed that I had no signal. That also made me nervous, but I tried to ignore it. I had come out here to visit an old vineyard I'd heard about from a friend, and I wasn't going to turn back just because it felt a little remote. I walked up to the main door. I heard my footsteps tapping against the old wood planks of the porch. The door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the tasting room looked dim. The overhead lights were on, but they were weak, almost yellow. I saw a small desk in the corner with a cash register and a few brochures. Behind the desk stood a tall woman with long, dark hair. She wore simple clothing and held a glass of wine in her hand. She stared at me for a moment, then smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It felt more like a routine gesture, as if she'd done it a million times and didn't care much anymore. She greeted me with a nod. I mumbled a hello and asked if they were open for tasting. She said yes, so I sat down at one of the wooden stools. The countertop felt sticky, and I noticed a thin layer of dust on it. She poured me a small sample of red wine from a bottle with no label. I sipped it. It tasted sour at first, then bitter. I tried to hide my expression because I didn't want to seem rude. She stared at me the entire time without speaking. I asked if they had a menu or a price list. She shook her head. I asked if there were tours of the grounds. She nodded. I asked when. She just said, "Later." I remember checking my watch. It was close to 4:30 then. The woman turned around and disappeared into a back room without a word. I looked around the tasting room. Dust covered most surfaces. I saw a single painting on the wall of a sprawling vineyard under a gray sky. A lamp in the corner flickered now and then. After a few minutes, I heard voices outside. I got off the stool and headed back through the door to see who it might be. A group of about 7 people walked together around the side of the building. They moved slowly, almost in sync, like they were part of some guided tour. But there was no guide in front of them. They all looked straight ahead with blank faces. They didn't talk to each other. They had no visible luggage or personal items in their hands. I called out to them, but none of them turned. They vanished behind the corner of the building, and I wasn't sure if I should follow them. I felt unsettled, but I also didn't want to give up on the idea of a proper wine tasting. So I went back inside. I waited for about 15 minutes, but the woman did not return. I felt bored and decided to explore the property on my own. I found a narrow hallway near the tasting room that led to a door marked "Private." I hesitated, but the curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the door, I ended up in a dim corridor with walls that smelled like old wood and damp earth. The hallway turned left, and soon I found myself on a small path that led outside toward the vineyards. I saw rows of vines stretching out into the distance. The ground looked dry, and the vines seemed twisted and old. The sun was lower in the sky, and the light was getting weaker. I noticed a few crows perched on a wire fence near the end of the row. As I walked between the vines, I heard soft singing. It sounded like a low chant, barely above a whisper. I stopped and tried to see where it was coming from, but the rows of vines blocked my view. The chanting got louder as I kept walking. I felt my heart rate increase, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I tightened my jaw. I told myself it was just staff members or visitors. Maybe they were having some kind of evening ritual or event, but it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. After a few more steps, I came upon a clearing in the center of the vineyard. About 20 people stood in a circle around a small fire pit. They swayed back and forth. They were chanting words I couldn't understand. The language sounded rough and repetitive, with a strange rhythm. A few of them held cups, and they all wore similar dark-colored clothing. I watched them from behind a thick vine. I didn't want to interrupt, but I also had a strong urge to ask what was going on. At the same time, something about it felt private, like I was witnessing something I wasn't meant to see. I looked around for a moment, trying to see if anyone else was standing off to the side. Then I stepped forward, close enough that my feet pressed into the hard soil near the clearing. I called out, "Hello?" None of them turned. They kept chanting. Their voices rose and fell in an odd pattern. The only light came from the fire in the center, which gave off thick smoke. The smell was pungent, almost like a mix of burning herbs and old wood. My eyes watered a bit from it, so I took a few steps back. I tried again. "Excuse me, what is this?" Still no reaction. It was like I wasn't there. I moved closer, right up to the edge of their circle. I could see their faces more clearly now. Their eyes looked distant, as if they were staring straight through the flames, not blinking much. One man's lips were cracked and dry. A woman across from him looked pale and sweaty. I reached out and tapped one of them on the shoulder. I felt the rough fabric of his shirt. He didn't flinch or acknowledge me in any way. It was as if my hand passed over a statue. My stomach tightened. I felt a strong need to leave, but I also felt glued to the spot by curiosity. I stood there for a couple of minutes, just watching them. The chanting got louder, then softer, then it stopped. They all breathed in at once, then lifted their cups. They tilted their heads back and drank. I heard the sound of liquid being swallowed. Then they lowered their cups and took a step back from the fire. For a moment I thought someone would say something or break the circle, but instead they started dancing in place. They didn't hold hands or form pairs. They just moved their feet in a stomping motion, slow and rhythmic, as if they were pressing grapes underfoot. The air smelled stronger, more like smoke and sweat. My heart pounded. I felt the dryness in my mouth and my hands were clammy. I cleared my throat, hoping that might catch their attention. Nothing changed. The dancers stared at the ground. Their shoes kicked up small clouds of dust. The sky above had turned a deep gray and the first stars were visible. The only light source was that weak, flickering fire. I couldn't figure out why nobody reacted to me. It wasn't like they were ignoring me in a rude way. They acted like I didn't exist at all. I thought about heading back to the building, but something about this bizarre circle made me linger. Eventually, I decided I'd had enough. I turned around and started to make my way back to the winery. As I did, I felt a presence behind me. I turned my head slightly, and I saw them continuing their dancing. But now they were closer together, and their movements looked more frantic. The chanting started again, faster this time, and the words sounded harsher. I picked up my pace. I didn't run, but I walked quickly, stepping over uneven dirt clumps and small rocks. My breathing got heavier, and I felt tension in my shoulders. I just wanted to get to my car and leave. When I reached the building, I went around to the front door. The tasting room lights were still on, but the door was locked. I jiggled the handle and knocked on the glass, but no one answered. I could see inside. The woman who had greeted me stood by the counter, but she had her back to the door. I knocked louder and yelled, "Hey, can you open up? I want to go." She didn't move. It was like she couldn't hear me. I felt a sharp panic in my chest, and I noticed my hands were trembling. I told myself to calm down, but it didn't help much. My throat felt tight. I walked around to the side of the building, hoping to find another entrance or at least a window I could open. The place was dark on that side with no lights at all. I heard rustling from behind the building, like footsteps in the gravel. I paused and pressed my body against the wall. My heart pounded like a drum, and I could hear my breathing echo inside my head. I peeked around the corner and saw a couple of silhouettes moving toward the back of the property. They walked in that same, slow, synchronized way, like the group I'd seen before. I took a few steps backward, careful not to make noise. I kept my eyes on them until they disappeared behind a row of vines. Then I continued around the building, looking for a back door. I found it, a simple wooden door with a rusty handle. It was unlocked. I slipped inside and found myself in a dark hallway. I ran my hand along the wall until I found a light switch. It flickered on. The hallway smelled like damp earth, and the walls were made of thick stone. There were several crates stacked on one side, and a few old wine bottles on a rickety shelf. I moved slowly, stepping around the crates. At the end of the hallway, I saw a stairwell leading down. I had no interest in exploring a cellar, so I looked for another door that might lead back to the main room. I found one on the left. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and realized I was behind the tasting bar, in the staff area. The woman was in the front, still standing by the counter with her back to me. I could see her from behind. Her posture was stiff, and she was holding that same glass of wine. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," I said in a clear voice. She didn't move. I got closer. I could smell the wine in her glass and also a hint of sweat from her. I reached out and touched her shoulder. She stayed still. I stepped around to face her, and her eyes looked at some spot above my head. She didn't blink. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I waved my hand in front of her face. No reaction. She looked like a living statue. My throat felt dry. I turned away from her. I didn't see anyone else around. I rushed out of the tasting room through the front door. This time it opened when I turned the handle from the inside. The sun had set completely, and the outside was almost pitch black. The only lights came from a few lanterns on the porch. I heard the chanting again, louder, echoing from beyond the vineyard. I sprinted to my car, the gravel crunching under my feet. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking. Then I got the key into the door and unlocked it. I jumped in, started the engine, and turned on the headlights. The beams lit up the driveway and part of the dirt path. The chanting grew even louder. I saw a cluster of people in the distance, standing between me and the main road. They were about 30 yards away, forming a line across the exit. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I knew they were staring at me. I could feel it. My chest felt tight, and sweat trickled down the sides of my face. I gripped the steering wheel and told myself I had no choice but to drive forward. I eased the car into gear and pressed the accelerator. The group did not move. They stood there, chanting in that same odd language. My headlights illuminated their faces. Their expressions were blank, but their mouths moved fast with the words. I pressed down on the horn. It echoed over the property. They stood there without flinching. My heart slammed against my ribs. I worried they might try to surround the car if I got out, so I inched forward. At the last second, they parted, splitting into two groups on either side of the driveway. I drove between them, feeling the bump of the uneven ground under the tires. Nobody reached for the car. Nobody spoke or made any noise besides the chanting. As I passed, I glanced at them out the window. Some looked dirty, with smudges of dirt on their cheeks and foreheads. Others were cleaner, but all of them had that same vacant stare. Their eyes never met mine. The chanting pounded in my ears. Once I was clear, I hit the gas and sped down the driveway. I felt every rock under the car's wheels. My headlights bounced, showing me glimpses of dusty vineyards and gnarled trees. After about a minute, the winery and the people were out of sight. The chanting faded. My chest loosened a bit, but my hand still gripped the wheel like a vice. I made it to the main road, still with no signal on my phone. I decided to keep driving until I found some kind of town or place with lights. About 10 minutes later, I finally saw a small gas station sign glowing in the distance. I pulled in, parked near a pump, and just sat there for a moment, catching my breath. My shirt was damp with sweat, and my stomach felt like it was in knots. The station was closed, but it had bright lights in the lot. I felt safer just being in a lit area. I tried my phone again. A single bar of service appeared. I called a friend and told him I needed to explain something weird, but all I could do at that moment was ask for directions to the nearest motel. I didn't mention the ceremony or the strange people. I didn't even know how to describe it without sounding out of my mind. I drove another half hour to a small roadside motel. I paid for a room, took a shower, and sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. My body shook from adrenaline, and I couldn't get the chanting out of my head. There was a dull ache in my temples. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces again. I felt like I couldn't fully process what had happened. They acted like I didn't exist right up until I tried to leave. Then they blocked the path, but let me pass when I pushed forward. It was like I was invisible to them, except for that final moment when I needed the exit. I spent the rest of the night with the TV on, flipping channels without watching anything. I just wanted background noise that wasn't chanting, that wasn't dancing feet on dry soil. Eventually, around 4 in the morning, I dozed off for a couple of hours. When I woke, I felt dull and groggy. I left the motel and drove back to a nearby city. I never filed a police report or told anyone else what I experienced. It sounded too strange to explain, and there was no sign of harm. Nobody died, and I didn't see any children involved. I figured the local authorities wouldn't do much without concrete details. A part of me wondered if the people in that circle would ever come after me, but I doubted it. They seemed trapped in their own world, so fully that I was barely a nuisance. I never went back to that winery. I tried to research it online a few times, but I found almost nothing. A couple of old photos, a vague address, and some outdated reviews. I couldn't find a phone number that worked, and the website link was broken. I stopped trying after a while. Sometimes I think about that dusty tasting room, the woman who wouldn't look me in the eye, the silent group drifting around the building, and that chanting circle at night. I can still recall the smell of the burning herbs and the sour taste of that unlabeled wine. Whenever I think about it, my palms get sweaty and my heart rate goes up. I don't have any fancy explanation for what I saw. I know what happened, and I know how it made me feel. I can still see that line of people blocking the exit, chanting in unison, and then parting without a single word to me. It's the strangest thing I've ever experienced, and it still gives me chills. Even though I came out physically fine, I can't shake the sense that I brushed up against something I wasn't supposed to witness. I haven't been to a winery since, and I don't plan on going to any place that's secluded again. If I ever see a flyer for a remote wine tasting, I remember those blank faces in that eerie circle. It's enough to make me drive right past. I wasn't planning on seeing anything strange when I left my cabin that morning. I just wanted to walk a trail I'd heard about from a ranger weeks earlier. The ranger mentioned that it wasn't official, but it led through some remote areas where old farmland used to be. He said people sometimes found arrowheads or broken tools. That interested me enough to ignore the usual tourist paths. I drove out before sunrise and parked my truck on the side of a dirt road. The day started cold, so I wore a light jacket and made sure I had enough water and snacks. I felt a little excitement, the kind that comes with exploring somewhere off the map. I followed a narrow track that cut through tall grass and loose rocks. I noticed the lack of footprints, which told me not many people took that route. The trees were mostly pines and oaks, spaced far apart. I heard birds calling in the distance, some crows circling overhead. The ground smelled of damp earth. The air was cool and carried a faint hint of pine resin. At times I heard squirrels chattering. Apart from that, it was quiet. As the sun got higher, I kept looking for signs of old farmland. Maybe a collapsed fence or a patch of turned-over dirt that didn't match the rest. After a couple of hours, I saw broken wooden posts leaning at odd angles. The wood was rotten, but the shape suggested these posts had once been part of a gate or fence. Grass grew around them, tall and dry. Nearby, I noticed tire tracks, but they looked old, barely visible. They might have been from a tractor or maybe an old car. They ended abruptly near a cluster of rocks. I pushed forward. My legs felt strong. I knew I had energy to hike all day if I needed. I stopped to drink some water and ate a granola bar leaning against a tree. The taste of peanut butter felt good after the bland water. I heard a breeze rustle the leaves. My mouth felt dry, and I reminded myself to conserve my water. There was no clear stream around, just some dried creek beds further back. After a while, I spotted something unusual, a small mound of debris that looked like it might have been part of a building. I walked toward it. The ground was uneven, with holes where some animals had dug. I saw bits of rusted metal, a few shattered glass pieces, and rotted beams collapsed into a heap. It took me a moment, but I realized this might have been a barn or storage shed. The beams were thick, and the broken metal could have been pieces of farm equipment. I stepped around carefully, not wanting to cut myself or break an ankle in a hidden ditch. The place was silent except for the occasional breeze. Then I noticed something farther ahead, a larger structure with a partially collapsed roof. I couldn't see it fully from where I stood. I walked on, minding my footing. The building came into view. It looked like a farmhouse, old and ruined. Part of the roof was caved in. Most of the windows had no glass. The door was hanging off its hinges, leaning inward. The walls had peeled paint and large cracks. I walked around it, looking for anything recognizable. The front porch was sagging. A torn screen door lay flat on the warped boards. The place felt forgotten, like nobody had touched it in decades. I wondered who had owned it, why they left, and how long it had been sitting here. I didn't see any clear path for vehicles, just that faint fence line from earlier and the scattered debris. I stepped onto the porch, testing each board before shifting my weight. The wood creaked under me. My heart sped up a little because I wasn't sure if the porch would hold me. Inside, the air smelled stale and dusty. The floor was covered in debris, fallen plaster, broken furniture, and dead leaves. A shattered table leaned against a wall with stains that looked like mold. I saw a few holes in the walls, possibly from animals. A ripped curtain hung from a bent rod near a window that faced the fields. No light fixtures worked. The only illumination was the daylight seeping through holes in the roof and cracks in the walls. I took a few steps inside and felt my pulse quicken. Something about standing in that ruined house gave me a jolt of adrenaline. It wasn't fear exactly, more like unease. My ears picked up every small sound, my boots scraping against the grit, the rustle of my jacket, the slight whistle of the wind. I wanted to see if there was any sign of old photos, letters, or something that might give me a clue about the people who once lived here. But everything looked stripped and damaged. If there had been anything personal, it was long gone. I walked into what I assumed was the living room. A moldy sofa sat there, cushions torn open, stuffing spilling out. The floor felt unstable near the center of the room, so I stuck close to the walls. I glanced up and saw the rafters. Some were broken, letting beams of light shine in from the roof. Dust motes floated in the air. I coughed once, the dust feeling rough in my throat. After a few minutes of exploring, I heard a faint noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on dry grass. My neck tensed. I turned and looked out a window. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted movement on the hill beyond the property. It looked like a person, maybe more than one, but they were too far away to see clearly. I felt a spike of concern, wondering if they were hikers, locals, or something else. I left the house through the front door, stepping carefully off the porch. I walked around the side of the building, hoping to get a better view of whoever I saw. When I reached the corner, I looked back toward the hills. I saw two figures standing still. They were wearing dark jackets or coats. I couldn't make out faces. They stood there, not moving, watching me. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. Something about their stillness got under my skin. My heart thumped harder. I lifted my hand in a small wave, trying to appear friendly. They didn't wave back. I considered calling out to them, but my throat felt tight. I waited, feeling uncertain. I decided to walk in their direction, at least to show I wasn't scared. But the moment I started moving, they turned and walked behind the ridge. It only took a few seconds for them to disappear. I felt my mouth go dry. I thought maybe they didn't want contact. Maybe they were shy or worried I might be trouble. Or maybe they were just curious. Still, it felt weird. I hadn't seen another soul all morning. This was a remote area. I considered leaving, but something inside me wanted to check that ridge. I wanted to see if they were just curious locals. I also worried they might be squatters protecting territory. My stomach knotted up at that thought. I didn't want any conflict, but my curiosity was stronger than my caution. I decided to head up the hill. I tucked my jacket closer, adjusted my backpack, and walked through the tall grass. The ground sloped, and I had to pick my steps carefully. Small rocks slid under my boots. The wind felt stronger up here. It whipped through the grass, making a shushing sound. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My mind kept replaying the image of those figures standing so still, just watching. When I reached the top of the ridge, I found no one. I looked around, expecting to see them heading off in the distance, but there was nothing but rolling hills and patches of trees. I tried to spot footprints. The grass was tall, so it was hard to see anything. I paused, turning in all directions. Nobody was there. My arms tingled with nervous energy. That feeling of being watched crept up on me. I scanned the area one more time. Still nothing. I decided to head back to the farmhouse. I didn't want to wander too far without knowing who these people were or what their intentions might be. As I walked back down, I kept checking over my shoulder. The farmhouse came into view, looking even more rundown from this vantage. I noticed the collapsed roof section more clearly. The sun was higher now. The temperature had warmed up, but I still felt a chill under my skin. Back at the farmhouse, I circled around to the backyard. There were remnants of a small vegetable garden, rows of dried-out soil, and a few broken stakes in the ground. A rusted watering can lay on its side. Behind that, I noticed another building, smaller, possibly a tool shed. It was missing a door, and the walls were partially caved in. Inside, I saw a few rusted tools, a broken ladder, and a spider web of cracks in the wooden walls. The sky was clear, bright blue. I heard a faint buzzing of insects. Otherwise, it felt too still. My senses were on high alert. My skin felt prickly. My stomach twisted, and I kept swallowing the dryness in my mouth. I decided I wanted to check the farmhouse a bit more, maybe go upstairs if it was possible. If I found nothing else of interest, I'd head back to my truck. I re-entered the house through the side door, which was missing most of its lower panel. The hinges screeched as I nudged it. The interior hallway was dark. I used the light from the open door behind me to guide my steps. The floor was littered with debris, broken plaster, rotted wood, and pieces of old wallpaper. I kept one hand on the wall to steady myself. The wall felt damp and cold. Toward the end of the hall, I saw stairs leading up. The banister was broken in places. Each step creaked loudly. I tested them carefully with my foot before placing my weight. My breath quickened and I felt sweat forming on my forehead even though it wasn't that warm inside. I made my way up slowly. The second floor was smaller than I expected, maybe just 2 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom. The hallway upstairs had a small window with cracked glass. Light came in at a sharp angle. The first door on my left led to a bedroom with a collapsed ceiling. Part of the roof had caved in, letting in a lot of light and some scattered debris. I saw a rusted bed frame with no mattress. The floor around it was covered in old leaves, twigs, and bits of broken shingles. There was a stale odor of mold and damp wood. As I stepped in, I looked around for anything interesting, maybe an old trunk or a closet. I found a closet door hanging crooked on its hinges. It was empty inside, just more debris. The second bedroom was in better shape, though still trashed. The walls had large cracks and the floor was covered in dust. A broken dresser stood against one wall, its drawers missing. The window here overlooked the backyard. I went over to the window to see if I could spot anything. I was curious about those figures. The backyard looked the same. Quiet. Nothing unusual. I decided to check the bathroom. The door was jammed, but I managed to push it open. The fixtures were rusted. The tub was stained and chipped. There was no running water, of course. The smell of mildew was strong. I stepped back out, feeling a growing sense of unease. I realized I was alone in this broken house with no idea if those strangers would return. I heard a noise outside again, that same faint crunch of grass. My body tensed. I rushed to the window in the second bedroom and looked toward the hills. I caught a quick glimpse of movement, a figure darting behind a large boulder. My heart pounded. It felt like a jolt of electricity through my chest. My palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants, trying to calm my breathing. I weighed my options. I could leave right away, put distance between me and whatever was out there. Or I could try to confront whoever it was. I didn't like the idea of them following me if I left. I decided to step outside and call out. Sometimes direct communication is the best approach. I wasn't armed, but I had a decent pocket knife in my backpack. I didn't want to escalate anything, though. I carefully made my way downstairs, stepping over the creaky spots. I returned to the front yard. My legs felt stiff. The sun was bright, and I had to squint. I took a deep breath to steady my nerves. Then I yelled out, "Hello? Anybody out there?" My voice sounded strange in the open air. I waited, listening. Nothing, not a single reply. The only sound was the faint breeze. I walked around to the back of the house, scanning the hills. I saw no one. I moved to the side yard where some debris was piled. I checked behind a tall bush, but there was nothing except an old rusted bucket. Every step I took made me more alert. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. The tension was building in my shoulders. The silence pressed on me. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone pop up. After 5 or 10 minutes of searching, I gave up. Whoever it was, they didn't want to talk. I felt the weight of the situation. I didn't know these hills well, and I didn't know if these people were hostile. The smart move seemed to be leaving. I gathered my courage, walked back to the front of the house, and headed toward the spot where I initially entered the property. As I crossed the field, I felt like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder every few seconds. My breathing was shallow, and my mouth felt dry. The grass rustled around me, and I listened for any sign of footsteps. Nothing. Just my own movement. My nerves were on edge, and my muscles felt tense. But no one appeared. That gave me a bit of relief, though I still had that tight feeling in my gut. When I got near the gate posts, I paused for one last look at the farmhouse. That's when I saw a lone figure standing on the porch. My heart jumped. The figure looked tall, dressed in dark clothing. They stood facing me. The distance was too great for me to see their face or any details. I froze. My hands twitched at my sides. I couldn't decide if I should call out or run. I took one step forward and the figure moved inside, disappearing into the shadows of the house. I felt a burst of cold sweat on my brow. I didn't know how many people were in there now. I decided I wasn't going back. I took a few more steps toward the posts, then forced myself to turn away. I hurried off, retracing my path along the narrow trail I came in on. As I walked, I kept checking behind me. I expected to see someone following, but there was only the open grass. My pace got faster, and my breathing stayed shallow. I forced myself to slow down whenever I stumbled on loose stones. I didn't want to twist an ankle in my rush. My body felt wired, like every nerve was on alert. My hands felt clammy. The crunch of my boots on gravel sounded too loud. Eventually, I reached the area where my truck was parked. The sight of it gave me a flood of relief. I looked around carefully, making sure no one was lurking in the bushes or behind the trees. I still saw nothing. The day was quiet again, almost too peaceful for what I had just experienced. I got into my truck, locked the doors, and took a moment to calm myself. My thoughts raced, replaying the images, the two figures on the hill, the person on the porch, the sense of being followed. My chest felt tight. I started the engine, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The truck rumbled to life, and I pulled onto the dirt road, heading away from that place. I glanced in the rearview mirror several times, half expecting to see a dark shape behind me. All I saw was dust and the empty road. I drove for a while in silence, trying to let go of the tension in my shoulders. I passed the spot where the official hiking trails began, where I had once considered taking a different route. Part of me wished I had stuck to the well-traveled paths, yet another part of me felt drawn to find out more, though I wasn't about to turn back. Once I was far enough away, I pulled over to the side of the road, took a long drink of water, and tried to compose myself. My hands were still unsteady. My forehead felt damp. The air smelled of dust and dry grass, but I was away from that remote farmland. I told myself I'd done the right thing by leaving. I didn't have a good reason to stick around and risk a confrontation. If those people wanted their privacy, they had it. I considered the possibility of coming back with another person or letting the ranger know what I found, but in that moment, I just wanted to get home. The memory of those silent figures gave me an uneasy feeling. I had no proof they meant any harm. They never attacked me or even approached me, but their behavior was so strange, and that silent watching was enough to rattle me. I continued driving, focusing on the road. Once I reached a paved highway, I could finally breathe a bit more easily. The rest of the trip was quiet. I replayed everything in my head, from finding the farmhouse to seeing those silhouettes on the hill. I wondered who they were and why they disappeared whenever I tried to get close. Maybe they lived around there, squatting in that old building, or maybe they were just drifters. Either way, I didn't like how it all felt. By the time I got back to my cabin, it was late afternoon. I parked my truck and sat there for a while, engine off, windows down, feeling the breeze against my face. My heart rate was almost normal. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. I went inside, locked the door, and let my pack drop to the floor. My body felt heavy. I splashed water on my face and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, checking for any sign of scratches or bruises. I saw nothing except my own weary expression. That night, I tried to distract myself by making a simple dinner. I grilled a small piece of chicken and ate some canned vegetables. The food tasted bland, but it settled my stomach. I tried to watch some TV, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to that deserted farmhouse and those silent onlookers in the distance. Each time I thought about it, my heart rate ticked up. I went to bed early, but sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, eyes open, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling. My mind wouldn't let go of the day's events. I felt a mix of relief at being safe and an odd pull to find out more, but I knew I wasn't going back anytime soon. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless sleep. Since then, I haven't returned to that trail. Part of me wants to forget it altogether, pretend it was a bizarre fluke or my imagination. But I can't deny that I saw those people, and I can't ignore how real my fear felt when they vanished. I still wonder who they were and what they were doing in that ruined farmhouse. I have no answers, just the uneasy memory of a silent standoff in the hills. For now, I've chosen to stick to the more familiar trails. I haven't mentioned this to many people, just a couple of friends who shrugged it off. They told me maybe it was just other explorers, or maybe I got spooked by nothing. I doubt that, though. I know what I felt out there. I've never quite shaken the sensation that there was something off about that place, but life goes on. I keep telling myself I was lucky there was no confrontation. No one got hurt. Nothing happened, really, except that I saw people who didn't want to be seen. That's the whole story. I found a farmhouse in ruins, saw figures on the hills, tried to approach, and they disappeared. It still gets under my skin. I can't put my finger on why, but it does. Sometimes I think about going back with a friend just to prove to myself there's nothing weird about it. Then I remember that moment I saw the figure on the porch. My chest tightens every time. So for now, I'm content to leave it alone. Maybe one day I'll work up the nerve to return, but it won't be anytime soon. Until then, that forgotten place stays in my mind, a memory of silent watchers and a ruined farm that I can't quite shake. I noticed something strange the moment I set foot inside that cabin. The door squeaked in a way that felt off, like it hadn't been opened in weeks. The air inside was stale and slightly musty, and there was a faint odor that I couldn't pin down. At first I thought it might just be mold or dust. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor, tried the lights, and saw them flicker for a second before they settled into a weak glow. I had rented this cabin for a few days in a national park. I wanted quiet. My job had been stressful and I needed a break from everything. My phone, the traffic, the noise of the city. The photos of this place looked cozy enough. A small kitchen, a living area, a tiny bedroom in the back, and a porch overlooking tall pines. No internet, limited cell signal, and lots of trees. That was the plan. Right away, something about the living room felt unwelcoming. The furniture was old. The coffee table had rings from drinks left on it, and the sofa cushions were threadbare at the edges. I ran my hand over the top of the sofa and felt a slight dampness. I guessed it was from the humidity. I remember sighing and telling myself I'd just open a window to air it out. When I walked around, I noticed a small wooden desk in the corner. Its top was scratched and dusty. The desk had a single drawer with a rusty handle. I tried to open it, but it stuck. I gave it a harder pull and it slid open. That's when I saw the diary. It was an old spiral notebook, the kind you might buy in a convenience store. The cover was half torn, with a few scribbles on it. I couldn't make out the name. It looked like part of a name that had been scratched out. The edges were smudged with some kind of dirt. I was curious, but I didn't want to stand there and read it right away. I set it aside, brushed off the desk, and decided I'd deal with it later. I wanted to unpack and settle in first. The bedroom was smaller than I expected. The bed squeaked when I pressed down on the mattress. The sheets looked clean, though, which was good enough for me. There was a wooden dresser under the single window. Outside that window, I could see tall pines swaying a bit in the breeze. The sky was cloudy, and it looked like it might rain soon. I remember feeling a chill in the air, so I put on a thin jacket before I walked back to the desk. I sat down in the old chair and took a closer look at the diary. The first page had a date from a few months back. The handwriting was sloppy, but I could read most of it. It said something like, "I can't sleep again. I keep hearing something outside. I thought it was raccoons, but it sounds bigger. Last night I heard footsteps on the porch." That was all for the first entry. I flipped a few pages. The next entries were short, describing nights of hearing sounds in the woods. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, things like that. Then it got weirder. One entry mentioned scratching noises on the outside walls. Another entry described seeing movement in the trees around dusk. There were fewer details than I would have liked, but it sounded like the writer was scared. I felt uneasy reading this. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination, or maybe someone who was freaked out by wildlife. But the more I read, the more I got this knot in my stomach. The writer said they woke up one night and saw a shadow pass by the bedroom window. They claimed it moved like a person, but it didn't have any distinct shape. I remember looking over my shoulder after reading that. The cabin felt quiet. My ears rang a bit from the silence. I knew it was just me psyching myself out, so I shut the diary and decided I'd make something to eat. There was a small kitchen area with a mini fridge and an old microwave. The fridge made a buzzing sound, which was strangely comforting because it reminded me of normal life. I heated a cup of instant noodles and sat at the small table in the kitchen. There was only one chair, which felt lonely. As I ate, the wind outside picked up and I could hear the branches tapping against the roof. At first it sounded like a gentle patter, but then it got louder, almost like someone was drumming their fingertips on the ceiling. It made me look up, but I saw nothing. Just a plain ceiling with a single exposed bulb. After dinner, I cleaned up and returned to the living room. The only source of entertainment was a small TV that looked like it was from the early 90s. I tried turning it on, but nothing happened. No signal, no static. It was just a blank screen. So I had no choice but to either read a book I brought or flip through the diary. I decided to keep reading. The diary entries became more frantic. The writer talked about hearing whispers outside. They claimed they saw a figure near the tree line wearing dark clothing, moving slowly through the woods. One entry said, "I know I'm not alone here. I see it every night. Sometimes it stands near the window and looks at me." That made my skin crawl. I felt my heart pound a bit harder, and I kept glancing at the front windows. By the time I finished half the diary, it was getting late. I was tired, and I didn't want to freak myself out more. I went to the bedroom, changed into more comfortable clothes, and got under the covers. The bed still squeaked with every movement, which was annoying. I turned off the small lamp and tried to sleep. I couldn't. I heard the branches scraping the cabin outside. The wind was howling a bit. My mind raced with thoughts of the diary entries. I reminded myself that it was just a story in a notebook left behind by some nervous person. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The darkness in that bedroom felt thick, and every time I moved, the bed springs squealed. I eventually drifted off, but I woke up a few hours later. I lay there, eyes open, heart thudding. I listened. It was quiet for a few seconds, then I heard a faint creak on the wooden porch outside. It sounded exactly like someone stepping on an old board. I froze. I could feel my pulse in my temples. The wind had died down, so it wasn't the breeze. I waited, barely breathing, listening for more footsteps. Nothing. I sat up slowly, turned on the lamp, and looked around the small room. The window showed only blackness outside. I didn't see anything. My heart was beating so fast it made my chest feel tight. I decided not to check the porch. I told myself it was probably just the cabin settling, but part of me knew it sounded like footsteps. I tried to sleep again, and after a while my mind calmed down. The next morning the sun came through the window and everything seemed more normal. I felt a bit silly for getting scared. I made some coffee in the tiny kitchen, then stood on the porch to sip it. The trees looked the same as any other morning in a forest. The ground was damp from last night's rain, and the air felt cool. I breathed it in and tried to relax. I decided I'd explore the nearby trails. I grabbed a bottle of water, my phone, and locked up the cabin. As I walked along the trail, I noticed how dense the trees were. The path was well maintained, though, and I saw a few squirrels darting around. The sun was high, and the forest smelled of wet leaves and pine. It felt good to get moving and clear my head. I returned to the cabin in the late afternoon. My shoulders and legs were tired from hiking, and I felt hungry. Inside, the cabin air smelled stale again, like it never fully cleared out. I tried opening more windows. That's when I noticed the desk drawer was pulled open, and the diary was lying on top of the desk, flipped to a page in the middle. I was sure I had closed the drawer and left the diary stacked neatly with some other stuff I'd brought. But it was wide open, and the page had new wrinkles in it, as if someone had pressed down on it. My stomach churned. I walked closer and read the page it was open to. It mentioned strange marks on the windows, almost like smudges or handprints. It also said the writer heard a voice calling their name. I felt a chill crawl up my back. I glanced at the windows in the living room. They were dusty, but I didn't see any fresh marks. I checked each one. Nothing. Still, I couldn't explain why the diary was open. I stood there, my mind racing. Then I remembered I might have just left it that way. Maybe I forgot to close the drawer. I told myself I was just on edge. I spent the evening inside trying to stay calm. I read a bit, ate a sandwich, and listened to the wind pick up again. By nightfall, it got colder. I tried the cabin's heater, but it made a rattling noise that worried me, so I turned it off. The forecast said it wouldn't be too cold to sleep without it, so I put on another layer of clothing. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered once and then stabilized. I had a flashlight next to me just in case the power went out. I sat in the living room reading more of the diary. The writer described hearing tapping on the walls late at night, like someone rapping their knuckles on the wood. The writer also mentioned faint knocking sounds on the front door. My heart jumped when I read that. It reminded me of the noise I heard on the porch the night before. I forced myself to keep reading. The next entry said the writer confronted whatever was outside. They flung the door open but saw nothing. Then they heard footsteps circling the cabin, moving quickly, and the writer locked themselves inside. I was gripping the diary so hard my knuckles were white. I felt sweat on my forehead. I decided that was enough reading for the night. I wanted to distract myself, so I started rummaging through the small cabinet in the kitchen. I found some old matches, a candle, and a half-used box of crackers. No interesting supplies for entertainment. I shut off the living room light and walked to the bedroom. As I passed the window near the front door, I thought I saw movement outside. I stopped. The porch light was on, casting a small, dim glow over the steps. For a second I could swear I saw a shadow move past the edge of the porch. My pulse sped up and my hands felt clammy. I took a deep breath and leaned closer to the window. Nothing was there. The trees were still. The yard was dark. No sign of anything. I hurried to the bedroom and shut the door behind me, even though that door had no lock. I clicked on the small lamp and tried to keep my eyes away from the window. My mind was racing. I started to panic about what I'd do if I heard something again. The diary's words kept echoing in my head. I reminded myself that there was no mention of actual harm happening. It was more about the terror of not knowing what was out there. I got under the covers, but I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept jumping to every noise. Then I heard a creak outside, like the one from the night before. My heart hammered. I stared at the bedroom door, waiting. Another creak. It sounded closer. I told myself to ignore it, but my body felt tense, and I was breathing faster. I reached for my phone to check if I had a signal. Barely one bar. I felt a sudden urge to call someone, but I knew it wouldn't go through reliably. Plus, what would I say? I'm hearing noises in the woods? That didn't seem like an emergency. I stayed there, eyes on the door, listening. The noise stopped. I waited for another few minutes, but it didn't continue. Finally, I turned off the light, sank back into the pillow, and waited for sleep. After a long while, I guess I drifted off. I woke up early. Sunlight was coming through the curtains. I felt relieved. I hopped out of bed, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside to check the porch. The old boards creaked under my weight. I saw nothing unusual, just damp leaves and some pine needles. No footprints, no marks, no signs of anyone else. I decided to spend most of the day out of the cabin. I drove into the nearest town to buy some food and clear my head. In the car, I felt safer. The road was empty, winding around dense forest. By the time I got to the small grocery store, the sky was clear and bright. I bought enough supplies for the rest of my stay, thinking I'd tough it out. When I came back to the cabin, it was late afternoon. I parked, walked up the porch, and noticed the door was slightly ajar. I always locked it. My stomach flipped. I pushed the door open. The living room looked the same at first glance, but the desk drawer was pulled out again, and the diary was on the floor. It was open, pages bent against the floorboards. My hands shook as I picked it up. I saw new writing scrawled on the margin of one page. It said, "Stop reading." It wasn't there before. The handwriting was the same style as the rest of the diary. My heart pounded so hard I felt lightheaded. I knew I didn't write that. Nobody else should have been here. I set the diary on the desk, took a few steps back, and scanned the room. Everything else seemed untouched. My bag was still in the corner. The small kitchen looked the same, minus a slight shift in the position of the single chair. I started breathing heavily, trying to think of a rational explanation. Maybe the caretaker came by and left a note, but why use the diary? And why say, "Stop reading"? I considered leaving right then, but part of me felt like I needed to stick it out, maybe confront whatever was happening. I was also curious, so I put my groceries away, double-checked the windows, and locked the door again. I even dragged a small chair under the doorknob to block it, in case someone tried to push it open. The evening wore on, and I kept glancing at the diary. I was afraid to read more. That note kept echoing in my mind. I tried to watch the sunset from the porch, thinking maybe the fresh air would calm me down. The forest got dark slowly, the orange light fading between the trees. Eventually, I went back inside. I sat at the desk, turned on the lamp, and opened the diary again. I skimmed through the next pages. The writer described hearing heavy breathing right outside the bedroom window at night. They said they felt like they were being watched constantly. One of the last entries said, "I can't leave, it won't let me. It's here night after night. It knows I'm afraid." My entire body tensed. The hair on my arm stood up. That was the last written entry. But there was one blank page after it, then a final page with those 3 words, "Stop reading." I shut the diary, feeling a wave of dread. Then I heard it. A knock on the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. My heart slammed against my chest. I stood up so fast I almost knocked over the desk chair. The room was quiet again. I stared at the door. My hands were shaking. Another knock. My throat went dry. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it stayed closed. I moved closer, one step at a time, my feet feeling like bricks. The knocks came again, slow and steady. I flicked on the porch light from the switch by the door. Through the small window in the door, I saw nothing but the porch. No figure, no shadow. I told myself to stay calm, but I was breathing hard. I decided to speak. "Hello? Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. Silence. I took a moment, then carefully unblocked the door by moving the chair. I had no weapon, but I felt I had to see what was out there. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. The forest beyond was dark. The wind made the branches sway, creating faint rustling sounds. I stepped onto the porch, my heart pounding in my ears. I looked around. Nobody stood on the porch or near the stairs. No movement except the trees. I backed inside and shut the door. I locked it again, then leaned against it, trying to steady my breathing. My body felt tense and my mind was racing. I had no explanation for what was happening. I thought about the diary's warnings. I thought about leaving right away, but I was too shaken to drive at night on those winding roads. I also felt like if I ran, I'd just be giving in to whatever was messing with me. I turned off the lamp in the living room and sat in the dark for a while, listening for more sounds. The only things I heard were my own breathing and the occasional crack of the wood as the cabin settled. Eventually, I went to the bedroom, leaving the lights on in the hallway. I locked the bedroom door, even though I knew that wouldn't help much if someone really wanted in. I stayed awake, sitting on the bed, staring at the door. The cabin was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My thoughts were scattered. I pictured the previous occupant writing those entries, hearing the same noises, seeing the same weird signs. I wondered if they ever left. There was no mention of them leaving or anything else. Just that last warning to stop reading. At some point in the early morning, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, it was dawn. I felt stiff from sitting against the headboard all night. I walked into the living room and saw the diary lying on the desk. It was closed with no new messages. The front door was still locked. No sign of forced entry. I packed my things as fast as I could. I was done. My body felt shaky, and my nerves were frayed. I left the diary right where I found it, on the desk, in the same drawer. I didn't want to take it or destroy it. I just wanted to get away from that place. Before leaving, I stood on the porch for a moment, taking in the stillness of the morning. The forest looked calm, as if none of those events had happened, but I felt that lingering sense of being watched. I walked to my car, threw my bag in the back seat, started the engine, and drove off. I didn't look back. That's everything that happened. I still can't explain it. I try to convince myself it was just my imagination or maybe a prank. But the diary, the knocks on the door, the open drawer, and that warning scrawled in the margin, those things keep me up at night. I still feel like whatever was in those woods followed the same pattern described on those pages. And for the few nights I stayed there, those entries became my reality. I never saw a face, never found a person, and nothing physically harmed me. But the fear was real, and it sticks with me even now. I have no plans to go back. I froze the instant I saw the first masked figure. I was out on my usual night run, cutting through a narrow dirt trail behind my neighborhood. I liked running after dinner because the sidewalks were empty and the air felt cooler. That night the temperature was fine and the wind was calm. The moon was out, but not too bright. My legs felt strong, and my breathing was steady. I expected a normal run. I had no idea what I was about to see. I started at the corner of my street and followed the path that led past a few quiet houses, then curved into a patch of trees. I could hear my own footsteps on the pavement before I reached the dirt. There were a few streetlights at the entrance to the trail, but once I was in deeper, I relied on a small flashlight I carry for late-night runs. I don't like stumbling over roots or rocks, so I kept the light on and aimed at the ground ahead of me. After about 10 minutes, I heard a rustling sound in the brush. I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray cat, so I didn't slow down. But then I heard another noise. It sounded like branches snapping under someone's foot. I glanced to my left, thinking maybe someone else was out for a walk. I saw nothing. I kept running. I moved farther down the path, feeling my heart rate climb. Not from exhaustion, but from nerves. The trail isn't usually busy at night, and I began to feel uneasy. My flashlight beam caught something on a tree trunk. It looked like a strange mark. A symbol, maybe. It wasn't just a random scratch or a piece of graffiti. It looked deliberate. I took a quick look while I kept moving. It was shaped like two concentric circles with a single line crossing them, carved deep into the bark. My stomach tightened, and I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I tried to ignore it and kept going. A few seconds later, I saw another mark on a tree on my right. Same symbol, same careful carving. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure why it bothered me so much, but it gave me a bad feeling. I kept jogging, telling myself these were just teenagers messing around. But then I felt like I was being watched. I can't explain it in detail. It was just a heavy sense that eyes were on me. I pointed my flashlight to the side again, scanning the trees. That's when I saw the first masked figure. He was standing by a thick tree trunk, maybe 20 feet away. He was tall, wearing some kind of dark hood or cloak. I couldn't see his face. The mask looked pale in the flashlight beam. It wasn't a mask with a design. It just looked like a blank white face, maybe plastic or porcelain. He didn't move. He just watched me. I stumbled over my own feet and almost fell. My pulse raced and my chest felt tight. I slowed down out of pure shock, but I didn't stop. My thoughts jumbled. I wanted to say something, but my throat closed up. Instead, I just kept running, picking up speed. My mind was screaming, telling me to get out of there. As I rounded a bend, I caught sight of another symbol carved into a tree, and then I saw another masked figure. This one was on the opposite side of the path, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes. I just saw the mask, that pale oval shape staring in my direction. My legs felt weak, but I pushed harder. I kept going, flashlight bobbing. My breath came out fast and shallow. The sound of my running shoes hitting the dirt got louder in my own ears, like my body was on high alert. I didn't hear any chase. No footsteps behind me. No frantic movement in the bushes. But I saw more of those symbols. They appeared on 3 more tree trunks, spaced out along the path. Each time I spotted one, I saw a figure nearby, partially hidden, with that same pale mask. They never approached me. They never called out. They just stood there watching. By the time I reached the end of the trail, my shirt was damp with sweat and my breathing was ragged. There's a short slope that leads back up to the suburban street, right at the edge of our neighborhood. When I got there, I paused for half a second and glanced back. My flashlight swept across the trees. I didn't see anyone, but my stomach churned like I was going to be sick. I turned off the flashlight because the streetlights in the neighborhood gave me enough light. I kept jogging until I reached my block. My house is in the middle of the street, a small 1-story place with a simple porch and a single-car driveway. I sprinted the last stretch, feeling relief as I saw the glow of my porch light. I ran up the steps, unlocked the door, and got inside as fast as possible. My lungs burned and my chest felt heavy. My hands shook. I locked the door right away, sliding the deadbolt and the chain. Then I stood there in the entryway, panting, listening, expecting something to happen. The house was quiet. The clock in the living room ticked. I tried to calm down, leaning against the wall, wiping my forehead with the back of my hand. My mouth was still dry, and my legs felt weak. I kept replaying the sight of those masks in my head, those eyes behind them, that motionless stance. My heart pounded so hard it made my chest hurt. I stepped into the living room and looked out the front window, parting the curtains a little. My porch light illuminated the front yard, the sidewalk, and part of the street. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed a figure standing across the street, near a large tree on my neighbor's lawn. Another mask. It looked exactly the same as the ones in the woods. My gut twisted. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. The figure stood there for a few seconds. Then it seemed to move back into the darkness. I let the curtain drop. My hands were trembling. I didn't know if I should call the police. I wasn't sure what I'd say. I saw masked people in the woods, and one might be on my street. It felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew I had seen something real. My heart wouldn't slow down. I decided to check the back door. I went through the kitchen, making sure it was locked. I looked out the small window over the sink. Nothing. Just the fence and the neighbor's yard behind my place. I turned off most of the lights inside, keeping only a lamp on in the living room. I didn't want to stand out as a clear target through the windows. Then I stood in the dark of my hallway, listening. Every tiny noise made me jump. The refrigerator humming, the ice machine clicking, the pipes creaking. My mind was in overdrive. Eventually, I forced myself to sit on the couch. I tried to think if I'd offended anyone, or if I'd done something that would cause a group of people to harass me like this. But nothing came to mind. My life is pretty ordinary. I go to work, come home, run in the evenings, watch TV, and repeat. I don't have enemies. I don't have some big secret. So who the hell were these people? I got up and peeked out the window again. This time I didn't see anyone. The street was empty. My neighbor's house had their porch light on, but there was no movement anywhere. I caught my reflection in the glass. Sweaty hair, pale face, eyes wide. I felt a jolt of anxiety again, but I tried to breathe through it. I considered calling a friend, but it was late and I wasn't sure what to say. I double-checked that both doors were locked. Then I went to my bedroom and locked that door too, just in case. I kept a baseball bat under my bed. I took it out and leaned it against my nightstand. My heart was still pounding and I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sleep. but I stripped off my sweaty running clothes and put on shorts and a t-shirt. I grabbed my phone and laid in bed, scrolling aimlessly to distract myself. A couple of hours passed. I couldn't relax enough to sleep. My mind kept going back to those masked figures and the strange symbols. My body was still on edge. Each time I thought I heard something, I tensed up. Finally, at around 1 in the morning, I felt my eyelids getting heavy. I set my phone aside and forced myself to close my eyes. Sometime later, I woke up to a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on my driveway. My heart started pounding again. I grabbed my phone and noticed it was close to 3 in the morning. I could feel my muscles tighten as I listened. The footsteps were slow. It wasn't the sound of someone just passing by on the sidewalk. I gripped my bat and got out of bed. My mouth was so dry that my tongue felt thick. The rest of my house was dark. The temperature felt a few degrees cooler, and I had a slight shiver. I crept to the front window in the living room, moving as quietly as possible. My blinds were closed, so I eased one slat open with my finger. I peered out. My driveway was dimly lit by the streetlight across the road. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed movement on the sidewalk near my mailbox. Another masked figure. This one wore a hood, just like the first one I saw in the woods. The white mask glowed faintly under the streetlight. He was looking at my house. I felt the urge to flick on the porch light and yell, but something told me that might not help. I stayed quiet, breath shallow. My forehead felt slick with cold sweat. He took a step forward, then stopped. He lifted his head slightly like he was scanning the front of my house. My heart hammered so loud that I thought he might hear it. After a few seconds, he backed away and vanished into the shadows beyond the streetlight's reach. My knees felt weak, and I almost dropped the bat. I forced myself to stand still for another moment. I didn't want to open the door or chase him off. That seemed stupid. What if there were more of them? My mind raced with questions. I felt a wave of nausea. Then I realized I couldn't just stand there. I had to do something. I reached for my phone, thinking maybe I should call the cops. But then I hesitated. I wasn't sure if they would believe me. I could only say I saw suspicious people in masks. Is that enough? What if they're gone by the time a patrol car comes? I paced around my living room, gripping the bat. My hands felt clammy on the handle. My stomach was in knots. Every few minutes, I'd go back to the window, lift a slat, and check outside. I didn't see anyone anymore, but that didn't make me feel better. I felt watched. Around 4 in the morning, I heard another noise. This one came from the backyard. The fence squeaked a little when someone pushed on it. I froze, breathing hard. I turned off the lamp so I was in total darkness. I crept to the kitchen and peered out the window over the sink. I could barely see anything, just the outline of the fence and the dark shape of my neighbor's shed. I caught a slight motion near the fence line, but I couldn't be sure. I waited, my eyes straining. Suddenly, a face in a white mask appeared right in my line of sight. It was so close to the window that I jumped back and almost knocked over a chair. My heart hammered. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming. The figure stood there, on the other side of the glass, looking in. I couldn't see any eyes or details behind that pale mask. It was like a blank face pressed against the window. I didn't move, and I could feel my muscles shaking. The figure tilted its head slightly. Then it drew back and vanished into the darkness. I stayed in that position for at least 30 seconds, bat in one hand, phone in the other. My mind was filled with panic. I didn't know how many of them were out there. I rushed to my bedroom, locked the door again, and stood against it. My hands were trembling so much I could hardly type, but I forced myself to dial 911. The operator's voice was calm. I tried to explain what was happening without sounding crazy. I said there were people in masks lurking around my property, looking in my windows. She told me to stay on the line, keep my doors locked, and wait for officers to arrive. I told her my address, and she said someone was on the way. I thanked her, hung up, and gripped my bat. I waited in the dark, leaning against my bedroom door, listening for sirens. I felt like time had slowed down. My heart was racing. My palms were slick with sweat. Every few seconds I looked at my window, half expecting to see a mask peering in, but all I could see was the faint outline of the houses across the street. My ears were tuned to every creak of the house. Every shift of the wind outside made me flinch. About 10 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights flashing against my walls. The police had arrived. I heard car doors slam, then footsteps on my porch. I walked to my front door, still gripping the bat, and called out to identify myself. An officer told me to open the door slowly. I did. 2 officers stood there, shining flashlights around my living room. Their presence made me feel some relief. They asked me to explain again. I told them everything, from the weird symbols in the woods to the masked figures outside my house. I showed them the window where one of them had appeared. They checked my backyard first. They shone their flashlights over the fence, around the bushes, and along the perimeter of my house. Then they walked around the front yard and up and down the sidewalk. They didn't find anyone. They didn't see any fresh footprints or obvious signs of forced entry. One officer suggested maybe it was a prank, or maybe I was mistaken, but I could tell they believed I was scared. They took my statement, told me they'd have a patrol car swing by a few times during the rest of the night. After they left, I was still on edge, but having the police come out at least gave me some sense that I wasn't alone. I locked everything again. I sat in my living room until morning, too wired to sleep. I kept checking outside the window every few minutes. I didn't see anything else. No more movement, no more masked faces, but every noise made my heart jump. When dawn broke, I got dressed and went outside to look around in the daylight. The air felt cool, and the sky was getting brighter. I checked the sidewalk near my mailbox. I didn't see any footprints or dropped items. I walked to the side of my house where the backyard gate is located. It was shut, but not locked. I opened it and stepped into the yard. I noticed a few scuff marks in the dirt near the fence, like maybe someone had stood there or tried to climb it. There was no other sign of anything. I kept my guard up, feeling exposed out in the open. I thought about those symbols I'd seen on the trees in the woods. Part of me wanted to go back there in daylight and check them out, but the idea also made my stomach churn. I couldn't shake the image of those masked figures just standing there, silent, watching. I decided to wait. I went back inside, locked up, and brewed a pot of coffee. I sat in my kitchen, sipping coffee and staring at the backyard window. My hands were still shaky, and I didn't have much appetite. The rest of the day was a blur. I felt jumpy and exhausted. I tried to watch some random TV shows, but I couldn't focus. Every so often, I'd check outside the front window or peek into the backyard. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary. The hours dragged. My phone rang a couple times, but it was just spam calls. I thought about telling a friend what happened, but I knew they'd think I was nuts or paranoid. That evening, I sat in my living room and kept the lights on. I tried to eat a sandwich, but my stomach kept fluttering, so I barely finished half. When it got dark, I felt my anxiety spike again. I decided I wasn't going to run that night. No way. I locked the doors and closed all the blinds. I made sure every window had a curtain drawn. Then I sat on my couch with the TV on low volume, just enough to distract me. I kept my bat by my side. I was afraid to look at the clock because I didn't want to see how slowly time was passing. Every minute felt like an hour. My legs twitched with leftover adrenaline. Around midnight, I heard a car drive by, but otherwise the street was quiet. No knocks on the door. No footsteps on the driveway. No glimpses of pale masks in the darkness. I told myself that maybe whoever it was had moved on. I tried to sleep on the couch, but it was uncomfortable. I shifted around for a while, then got up to grab a bottle of water from the kitchen. My mouth felt like sandpaper. I flicked on the kitchen light, took a drink, and leaned against the counter. My ears were tuned to every little noise. The dishwasher clicked. The fridge hummed. I heard the wind pick up outside. I walked to the small window again, feeling my heart race. When I pulled the curtain aside, the yard was empty. I saw only the fence, the neighbor's shed in the distance, and a few shadows cast by the porch light. Nothing else. I let the curtain drop and returned to the living room. After a while, I managed to doze off, gripping the bat in my right hand. That was the first night. Since then, I haven't gone back to that trail after dark. I've been checking my windows obsessively, especially at night. Sometimes I think I see a shape in the distance, but it might just be my nerves. The police have driven by a couple of times, but I don't have new evidence to give them. I don't know who those people were or what those symbols mean. All I know is that I'll never forget those blank white masks staring at me from the darkness, and I have no idea if they plan to return. For now, I'm keeping my doors locked and my eyes open. I'm not taking any chances. I pulled into the empty parking lot around 10:01 p.m. because the entire mall had just closed. The lot was huge and most of the floodlights were still on, but the place felt deserted. My plan was simple. Grab a quick item from one of those 24-hour stores attached to the mall entrance and then drive home. I had worked late and needed to pick up a replacement charging cable for my phone. I didn't expect anything weird. I thought I'd walk in, buy the cable, and head out. But from the moment I stepped out of my car, I knew something felt off. I looked around. All the other parking spaces were empty, except for a few scattered vehicles on the far side of the lot. The warm night air clung to my skin, and there was a faint smell of concrete dust. The tall parking lot lamps buzzed softly. Usually, I don't pay much attention to my surroundings, but I noticed how still it was. There were no people chatting, no footsteps echoing off the pavement, no security guard passing by. Just the quiet hum of electricity and my own breathing. I walked toward the mall entrance. A glass door was propped open, but the fluorescent lights inside were dim. I slipped in, bought my cable from a small electronics kiosk near the entrance, and left. I was in there for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing strange happened while I was inside. The cashier was half asleep, and the few people wandering around looked like they were only there for quick errands. No one talked much. I liked that because I was tired. I just wanted to go home and crash on my couch. When I came out, I noticed my shadow under the fluorescent lights near the doorway. It trailed behind me on the polished floor. I didn't think anything of it then. I just walked outside. I saw my car across the lot, standing under a row of overhead lamps. The corner of the lot was darker because some of those lamps were burnt out. Everything was bathed in yellowish light, except for that shadowy area near the edge. As I approached my car, I caught sight of my own shadow stretching out in front of me on the pavement. It looked normal at first. Then I moved my right arm to scratch the back of my neck, but my shadow's arm didn't move in sync. I stopped walking. My breath caught in my throat. I thought, maybe I was tired, or maybe the light angle was playing tricks. I lifted my foot off the ground, just a small motion, but the shadow didn't lift its foot at the same time. It lifted it a second later, like it was copying me with a slight delay. That was enough to make my hands shake. I turned in a slow circle, trying to see if another shadow or another light source might be interfering. But there was only one strong beam on me from overhead. My shadow was the only one visible on the ground. My head felt hot, and I could feel sweat collecting along my hairline. I put the shopping bag on the hood of my car and watched the shadow carefully. It stood there on the pavement, shaped exactly like me, but it didn't mirror my motions at the right time. I decided to test it again. I bent my knees, and I counted 1, 2, then the shadow bent its knees. I raised my hands, 1, 2, then it raised its hands. I felt a surge of panic. I'm not the type to believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but I had no other explanation. I muttered to myself, "This can't be happening." My heart pounded in my chest, and my arms felt cold despite the warm night air. I needed to get into my car and leave. That was my only thought. I grabbed the door handle on the driver's side, but the car was locked. My shadow stood on the pavement like a weird reflection that didn't want to cooperate. I pulled my keys from my pocket. My hand shook and I almost dropped them. I hit the unlock button on the key fob. The car lights flashed. I looked down. The shadow was still there. a few feet in front of me. It hadn't moved closer, but it wasn't matching my stance. I was standing straight, but it still looked slightly crouched, like it was lagging behind in a different position. I breathed in and out, then I opened the car door. The interior lights came on, illuminating the driver's seat. I climbed in and pulled the door shut. My pulse was racing so fast that I could hear a faint whoosh in my ears. My mouth felt dry. I stuck the key in the ignition, twisted it, and the engine turned over. The dashboard lit up, and the radio kicked on at a low volume. I pressed the door lock button. All I could think was, "Get out of here. Go. Don't look back." As I shifted into reverse, I glanced at the side mirror. I saw something dark flicker. I slammed on the brake and turned around to look through the rear window. My shadow was on the ground behind the car. The overhead lamp cast it there, but it seemed closer than before. I had no idea how that made sense. The angle of the light shouldn't have changed in that way. I felt my chest tighten and I could feel my heart beating against my ribs. I shifted again and started to back out slowly, expecting the wheels to bump over the curb or something, but the car rolled smoothly. I kept looking at the mirror. The shadow moved too, but the motion still had that delay, like it was separate. Each time I inched the car in reverse, the shadow seemed to move a moment later, as if it had its own timing. I needed more distance. I pressed the gas a bit harder. I got to the exit lane of the parking lot. I looked to the left and right. At this hour, there was barely any traffic. I turned onto the main road that looped around the mall. For a moment, I felt some relief. The bright streetlights overhead lined the road. I was moving away from that weird situation. I told myself everything would be fine if I just kept going. But after maybe 2 minutes, I noticed a flickering movement in the corner of my eye. I looked at the road behind me in the rearview mirror. It was hard to see anything except darkness. Still, I felt uneasy. I slowed down. Then I glanced to my left side mirror. Under one of the streetlights, I saw my shadow on the road's surface. But I could swear it was stretched out in an odd shape. It was as if it had followed me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles popped. I didn't want to stop, but I felt a need to make sure I wasn't just imagining things. I pulled over to the side of the road near a small loading dock area behind the mall. The place was deserted except for a few big trash containers and a row of delivery truck bays. I turned off my engine, left the lights on, and stepped out of the car to check the situation. The overhead streetlight cast my shadow onto the pavement again. I forced myself to watch it. As I took 2 steps forward, the shadow took 1 step forward, then another. It didn't mirror my steps in real time. It had a weird pattern. My stomach felt heavy and my legs were tense. I started to walk in a small circle, just testing it. The shadow followed, but always with that lag. Or sometimes it moved a bit faster to catch up. I could almost feel my nerves tightening with each second. The back of my neck prickled like someone was standing right behind me. My breathing became short and shallow. I whispered, "What is this?" I had never felt so helpless. It's just a shadow, right? But it wasn't behaving like one. I decided to get back in my car and drive home. That was my plan. Just get home and lock the doors. I didn't care if I had to call someone to spend the night at my place. I didn't care if I had to drive an hour out of town. I wanted to be somewhere safe. I opened the driver's door again. That's when I noticed something in the reflection of the glass. The shadow was right behind me. It looked closer than before, as if it had closed the gap. I felt a jolt of fear in my gut. I slammed the door shut without getting in, spun around, and stepped away from the car. The shadow was near my feet, but it wasn't shaped exactly like me at that moment. It seemed to be turning its head slightly, even though I wasn't turning mine. I froze. My legs started trembling. I couldn't just stand there, so I ran back to the driver's side, yanked the door open, jumped in, and locked the doors again. My breathing was rough. I started the engine and backed out of that spot so fast the tires squealed on the pavement. I flicked on my high beams even though it was a street with overhead lights. I just wanted more visibility. I sped toward the main exit of the mall complex. The roads leading out were mostly empty. A couple of cars passed by, but nobody seemed to notice my panic. I reached a traffic light and had to stop. I tapped my foot nervously on the brake pedal. I was afraid to look in the mirrors. I was worried I'd see the shadow behind the car again. Eventually, the light turned green and I hit the gas. I merged onto a larger road that led to the highway. My plan was to take the next on-ramp and head straight home. My chest still felt tight. My fingers tingled. My shoulders were sore from gripping the wheel so hard. I flicked my eyes from the windshield to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirrors. I saw normal shadows cast by my car's headlights, but I also noticed a shape under one of the street lamps behind me. It seemed to move in short jerks as if it was trying to match my speed or keep me in sight. I told myself I was just paranoid, but I couldn't calm down. I decided to pull into a gas station that was still lit up and had a few vehicles around. I figured being around other people might help. I parked near one of the pumps and looked around. There was no clerk visible outside, but the station's store had its lights on. I could see a tall guy paying for something inside, and another person was in there browsing. At least it wasn't deserted. I got out of my car, feeling the cool night air against my sweaty skin. I kept glancing around for any sign of that shadow. I walked toward the store's entrance. The automatic doors opened with a hiss. The overhead lights inside were bright, and I heard music playing softly through the ceiling speakers. There was a slight smell of cleaning solution. I saw the tall guy leaving, so I just nodded at him. He walked by me without saying anything. I grabbed a cold bottle of water from the fridge and approached the cashier. He looked tired, probably bored out of his mind. I placed the bottle on the counter and tried to act normal, but my voice shook when I said, "How's it going?" He answered with a shrug. I paid and told him to keep the change. Then I turned around and headed outside. I paused right at the automatic doors, letting them slide open, then closed, then open again because I was looking for my shadow. It was on the pavement in front of me, under the station's bright lights, but it seemed the correct shape now. I lifted my left arm and the shadow did the same thing without any delay. I blinked, confused. My heart was still pounding, but for that moment, it appeared normal. I walked a few steps forward, watching the shadow move in perfect synchronization. My shoulders relaxed a bit and I drank some water. It was cold and tasted slightly metallic. Maybe the weird events were done. Maybe it was just a trick of the light back at the mall. I felt some relief, but I was still on edge. I got back in my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the gas station. I turned onto the highway ramp. The road ahead was empty. I merged into the right lane and accelerated. The lights along this stretch were spaced out, leaving patches of darkness between them. My headlights cut through the gloom, but the edges of the road were lost in shadows. After a few minutes, I found myself checking the mirrors again. I saw my shadow across the back seat, just from the overhead highway lights bleeding into the car. It looked normal, just like any driver's silhouette. Then a flicker of motion caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It looked like a shape shifting in the back seat. I twisted around in my seat to look directly. There was nothing there, just the empty back seat and the black windows. My pulse spiked again. I turned forward and gripped the wheel. "Calm down," I muttered to myself. "You're just scared." I pressed the accelerator, wanting to get home faster. The sign for my exit appeared. I put on my blinker, turned onto the off-ramp, and slowed as I approached the intersection. A single streetlight was on the corner. I waited for the red light to change. I glanced out the driver's side window. That's when I saw my shadow on the ground next to the car, as if it was standing outside, not attached to me. I could see it cast by the streetlight, but it didn't line up with my position inside the car. My breath caught again. I felt a rush of adrenaline surge through my body, making me grip the steering wheel even harder. The light turned green. I accelerated and took a left turn. My neighborhood wasn't far away. It was quiet at this hour. I passed dark houses and a few yards with chain-link fences. My house was at the end of a cul-de-sac. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat there for a few seconds with the dome light on. My heart still pounded. I kept looking around the yard, the sidewalk, the bushes along my front fence. Nothing moved. I got out of the car carefully, half expecting that strange shadow to be waiting for me. The moon was out, but the main source of light was the street lamp near the corner of my lot. I could see my shadow on the ground, shaped like me, and it was doing exactly what I did. I moved my arm, it moved its arm in sync. I bent my knees. It followed. I felt a wave of relief, but it was mixed with lingering dread. I didn't trust it to stay that way. I walked to my front door, unlocked it, and slipped inside. I locked the door behind me, then turned on the hallway light. My living room was dark, but it was my familiar space. I took off my shoes and dropped my keys on the small wooden table by the door. I stepped into the living room and switched on a lamp. Everything looked normal. My couch, my TV, my kitchen counter in the back with a few unwashed cups. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded comforting. I decided to check my reflection in the living room window, just to see if the shadow was acting strange again. I saw my outline reflected against the dark yard outside. It matched my movements perfectly. I tried a few gestures. It followed. My heart rate finally started to slow down. I felt exhausted. My clothes clung to my body and my throat was parched again, so I went to the kitchen for another drink of water. I stood there leaning against the counter and chugged it straight from the bottle. A dull ache lingered in my chest from all the adrenaline. My limbs felt weak. I dried my mouth on the back of my hand. I decided to go to my bedroom and try to calm down. Maybe I'd watch something on TV or scroll through my phone until I fell asleep. But a part of me was still thinking about that delayed motion. It wasn't normal. Nothing about tonight was normal. I walked toward my bedroom. The hallway was dim, lit by a small nightlight I keep plugged into the wall. As I passed by the bathroom, I saw my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The overhead light in the hallway cast my silhouette into the mirror, but it looked normal. My reflection moved with me. I kept walking. My bedroom door was half open. I reached for the light switch inside the room and flicked it on. The overhead bulb blinked a few times, then stayed steady. I set my phone charging cable on the dresser. I glanced at the walls, the floor under the bed, just a quick check to make sure everything was in its place. Then I noticed my shadow on the wall near the dresser. The bedroom lamp was behind me, so I could see my shape on the wall. My arms were at my sides, but the shadow's arm seemed slightly outstretched, like it was reaching for something. I took a step forward. It took a step a fraction of a second later. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run outside, but I also felt too drained to keep running. I stood there watching that shadow. I moved my right hand up. It matched me, but with a half-second lag. My skin broke out in goosebumps. My eyes started to water because I wasn't blinking. I forced myself to inhale and exhale slowly. I said out loud, "Leave me alone." My voice sounded shaky and a little silly, but I couldn't control that. The shadow stood on the wall. It didn't respond. I backed up and switched off the bedroom lamp. Darkness flooded the room. Then I flicked on the hallway light from inside my bedroom. The angle changed. Now the shadow spread across the floor instead of the wall. I watched it closely. It seemed normal for a few seconds. Then it shifted as if it was off by a few inches. I took 2 steps to the left. The shadow mimicked me, but with that unsettling delay. My breath quivered. My palms were sweaty. I realized I had goosebumps all over my arms and neck. This thing was following me everywhere, and I couldn't shake it off. But it hadn't hurt me. It just copied me in a delayed or strange way. I decided to close my eyes and pretend it wasn't there. I climbed into bed, fully dressed, and pulled the covers over my legs. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. My head hurt from stress. I took slow, deep breaths. Finally, I reached over and turned off the hallway light, plunging the entire house into darkness. No more shadow. No more weird reflections. Just me in my bed. My eyes stayed open for a long time, trying to spot any movement in the darkness. But I saw nothing. I heard only the hum of the fridge and the ticking of some pipes in the wall. I lay there, mind racing. I wanted to believe that I'd wake up the next morning and find everything back to normal, that my shadow would move in perfect unison like it's supposed to. I rubbed my forehead and pressed my eyes shut. My bed felt warm, and I shuddered a little from the tension. Eventually, my breathing slowed and my eyelids grew heavy. I drifted into a light sleep, half expecting to jerk awake at any sound. I don't know how long I slept, but sometime in the early morning, I woke up in a cold sweat. My t-shirt clung to my back, and the sheets felt damp. I didn't remember any dreams. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. It was almost 4 a.m. I lay there, listening. The house was quiet. I stared at the ceiling, trying to decide if I had the courage to flick the light on and check my shadow again. I stayed still for a few minutes, just breathing. Eventually, I sat up, slid out of bed, and turned on a small lamp. I looked around. My shadow was on the wall behind me, exactly how it should be. I lifted my arm. It lifted its arm at the same time. No delay. I let out a slow breath of relief. I lowered my arm. It lowered its arm. Perfectly synchronized. I felt tears of relief well up in my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly. I didn't want to start crying. I felt silly and drained. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, just watching that shadow. It stayed in place, matching me perfectly. After everything that happened, I didn't trust it, but at least it looked normal. I got up and walked to the bathroom. The bathroom mirror showed me exactly what I expected to see. I looked tired, eyes bloodshot, hair messy. The mirror reflected me in real time. My shadow moved with me in the correct way. I splashed cold water on my face, patted it dry with a towel, and walked back to my bedroom. I shut off the lamp, got back into bed, and pulled the covers around me. My heart was still beating faster than normal, but I forced myself to breathe slowly and deeply. I concentrated on the softness of my pillow and the steady hum of the air conditioning vent. I couldn't forget what happened at the mall, though. The delayed movements, the sense that it was getting closer. That memory sent a chill across my skin. But as I lay there in the dark, I realized I felt safer in my house than I did out in that empty parking lot. My chest muscles loosened a bit. I stared into the darkness and reminded myself that right now, everything looked normal. I heard the faint buzz of my phone on the nightstand, probably a notification about some email or a random alert. I ignored it. My body was too tired to move. Slowly, my eyelids grew heavy again and I started to drift off into sleep. No more weird shadows, at least for now. At some point, the exhaustion took over completely and I slipped into a dreamless sleep. I didn't want to think about the events of the night anymore. I just needed rest. And finally, in the safety of my bed, I felt like I might get it, until morning, when I'd have to test my shadow again. But for now, I closed my eyes, listened to my heartbeat, and let darkness take me under. I never planned on staying late at the office. I just had a few tasks to finish, and I figured it would be easier to knock them out after everyone left. By the time I realized how late it was, the security lights in the corridors were already the only source of illumination. The entire place felt hollow, like an abandoned warehouse. My footsteps echoed all the way from my office to the elevator, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was holding its breath. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I pressed the down button and waited in silence, counting the seconds. The elevator finally arrived with a ding that seemed sharper than usual. The doors slid open. The inside lights flickered for a moment, and then they steadied. I got in, pressed the button for the lobby, and leaned against the wall. My plan was to get home, eat something quick, and pass out on my couch. I wasn't thinking about anything except how tired I felt. I was rubbing my neck and rolling my shoulders, trying to loosen up. Then the doors closed and the elevator started to move. It was slow and it creaked a bit more than it usually did. I stared at the illuminated numbers above the door. They went from 14 to 13 to 12, and that's when it got weird. Usually the elevator runs straight down to the lobby without stopping at night. Security keeps all those floors locked and no one's supposed to be inside. but the elevator jerked to a stop at the 12th floor like someone had pressed a button. I figured maybe security was there, or some late-night maintenance worker. But when the doors opened, the hallway was dark. There was just a faint glow from a single overhead light. It reminded me of those old, dingy basements where the bulb is about to go out. No one stepped inside. I didn't hear footsteps, but I heard something that sounded like a hiss or a static crackle. I leaned forward, trying to see if there was anyone out there, but I saw nothing except the worn carpet and a few doors on each side of the corridor. Every door was closed, and not a single one had light seeping out from underneath. My stomach tightened. I pressed the close door button, but it took a few seconds longer than normal to respond. When the doors finally slid shut, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I told myself there was probably a glitch, or maybe someone had called the elevator and changed their mind. That kind of thing can happen, especially in an older building. But I could feel my pulse picking up. The elevator resumed its descent, and the numbers started counting down again. 11, 10, 9. Then it stopped at the 9th floor. Again, it jolted abruptly. The overhead lights flickered, and the doors slid open. The hallway on the 9th floor wasn't supposed to be in use at that hour. Most of the building's staff left by 6 in the evening, and you need a security pass to access certain areas after that. But here it was, open. The corridor looked even darker than the 12th floor hallway. The overhead lights were out, except for some emergency exit sign at the far end. A red glow pulsed from that sign, creating these weird shadows on the floor. I heard what sounded like muffled whispers. They weren't loud, but they were distinct enough that I could tell they were voices. They seemed to drift in and out like a breeze carrying them. I didn't see anyone. I clenched my jaw and tapped the closed door button again. My finger was shaking when I pressed it. The elevator doors took their sweet time shutting. I backed up, keeping my eyes on the open doorway, half expecting someone or something to appear in that gap of darkness. Nothing did. The doors finally slid shut. The elevator started moving again, and I felt this urgent need to get out of that building. I couldn't deny something was off. My heart was going crazy, thumping against my chest, and my palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe there was a power outage, or the building's control system was on the fritz. I told myself that as soon as I got to the lobby, I'd find security and let them know something was wrong. But the elevator didn't head straight for the lobby. Instead, it stopped at the 7th floor. My mind started to race. This wasn't normal. The doors opened onto another dark hallway. The only difference was that on this floor, the corridor lights were flickering, creating this strobe effect. It made my head hurt. I felt dizzy for a second. The strobing light caught the corners of the walls and the edges of the door frames, giving them a harsh outline. I heard something that time, a distinct shuffle like someone dragging their feet. Then I heard a single knock, a sound like knuckles rapping on a door. One knock, then silence. I caught myself leaning forward without realizing it. My instincts told me to stay back, but my curiosity made me take that half step. My stomach felt like it was in knots. I imagined someone out there, just around the corner, listening. I stayed quiet, not wanting to attract attention. The lights flickered a final time, then stayed off completely for a few seconds. I couldn't see a thing. I just stood there in total darkness with only the faint overhead light in the elevator behind me. Then the corridor lights came back for half a second. I thought I saw a shape at the far end of the hallway, but it vanished too quickly. My heart pounded even harder. My hand slapped the close door button again. This time the doors closed a bit faster. When they shut, I let out a loud exhale. As the elevator resumed its descent, I found myself muttering under my breath, telling myself I just needed to keep calm. I was starting to sweat. My shirt was clinging to my back, and I could feel my knees shaking a bit. Every muscle in my body was tense. I kept glancing at the panel, watching the numbers go down one by one. The elevator shuddered again. Then it skipped the 6th and 5th floors completely, going straight to the 4th. The abrupt stop nearly knocked me off balance. I reached out, grabbed the handrail on the wall, and steadied myself. Another ding, and the doors slid open. The fourth floor hallway was lit, but the light came from fluorescent tubes that buzzed loudly. You know that hum fluorescent lights make when they're old and about to burn out? It was an irritating, constant drone. My ears rang for a moment. The hallway was empty. I looked left, then right. My eyes locked on a pile of boxes stacked near the elevator. They looked like old file boxes. The top one had a lid slightly askew, as if someone had been rifling through it. The corridor branched off to the left, and around that corner I heard footsteps. They weren't hurried, just a steady pace like someone was walking back and forth. I swallowed hard and pressed the lobby button again, hoping the doors would shut before whoever was walking around decided to come any closer. But this time the door didn't respond at all. My pulse jumped. I hit the button harder, then started pressing it repeatedly. The doors stayed open, and the elevator refused to move. Then the footsteps stopped. That silence hit me like a punch. My body felt rigid. My arms were stiff. My breathing got shallow. The hum of the fluorescent lights buzzed louder in my ears. I decided I had to do something. I reached out, ready to press the alarm button on the panel. Right then there was a loud click, and the elevator doors began to close on their own. As they shut, I heard a low voice, almost like a sigh or a grunt, but it was too soft to make out words. My scalp tingled, and my mouth went dry. When the doors sealed, the elevator lurched downward again, continuing to descend in a halting, jerky motion. I felt a wave of nausea from the uneven movement. My legs trembled, and my throat tightened. I thought about hitting the emergency stop and just calling for help on the intercom, but a bigger part of me just wanted to reach the ground floor and get out. I stared at the numbers above the door. 3, 2, 1. Then the panel went blank, like it lost power for a second. I stared at it, willing it to light up. When the numbers came back, it said B1, which was the basement level. But the building only had one basement, for storage and maintenance. I'd never had a reason to go down there, and I sure didn't want to explore it at that hour. The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto what looked like another corridor, but it didn't match the normal basement layout. The hallway was narrow, with concrete walls and a single exposed light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I could see water stains along the walls, and the floor was damp. A cold draft swept in, brushing against my ankles. My teeth started chattering involuntarily. I stepped back, pressing myself into the corner of the elevator, wishing the doors would close right away. But they stayed open, as if inviting me to step outside. I heard a voice again, but this time it was clearer. It sounded like someone whispering, "Hey," from somewhere down the corridor. My chest tightened. There was a metallic smell in the air, like rust, and the cold felt sharper. My hands were clammy, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I couldn't see anyone, but the voice came again, a little more insistent. It said, "Over here," in this low, hushed tone. I shook my head, silently telling myself, "No way." My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I inched toward the elevator control panel, pressing the lobby button. Nothing. I tried the closed door button again, still nothing. It was like the elevator was locked in place, waiting for me to make a decision. A soft scuff of a footstep echoed from down the corridor. Then a faint tapping sound, like fingers drumming on a pipe. Each tap made my nerves jump. My eyes darted to the side, looking for some clue. The corridor was too dark to see very far. That single light bulb cast a weak circle of light on the floor. Beyond that, everything was black. I felt a jolt of panic. I mashed the alarm button. A buzz rang out inside the elevator, but no one responded. I grabbed the emergency phone on the panel, but there was no dial tone. I said, "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there?" Only silence answered me. I let the phone dangle. My heart felt like it was beating in my throat. My breath came in quick, shallow bursts. I needed to get out of the building, but the elevator wasn't cooperating. Then, without warning, the doors slid shut. No beep, no click. They just started closing on their own. As soon as they did, the elevator began to ascend. I watched the display climb from B1 to B. B. I'd never seen that on the panel before. The building's normal readout goes from B1 to 1, skipping any B. This was all new. The elevator came to a stop again, and the doors opened onto a hallway that looked like it belonged in a different building entirely. The walls were a dull yellow, the floor was scuffed linoleum, and a single fluorescent fixture buzzed overhead. Everything seemed older, maybe from a few decades ago. A single folding chair sat against one wall and the air smelled stale, like an attic that's been closed up for years. I took one step to get a better look. My legs felt shaky, and my stomach was still in knots. Then I heard a faint radio static, like an old radio station not tuned correctly. It crackled, stopped, then crackled again. The sound came from somewhere around the corner. I didn't want to leave the elevator, but the doors stayed open, and I still couldn't make it move. The display above the door kept flickering between B and a blank screen. I wiped sweat from my forehead, feeling a sense of dread crawl through my body. I knew I shouldn't step out, but I felt a pull, like I needed to find out what was going on. I took 2 steps into the hallway, close enough to peer around the corner. There was a short corridor leading to a closed door. The static was louder there. I heard a click, like someone fiddling with an old dial. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. My breath came in small gasps. I could feel my throat tightening. Something about this place felt impossible. The building didn't have a level like this, at least not one I'd ever heard of. I forced myself to step back into the elevator. Enough was enough. My entire body ached with tension, and I just wanted to leave. I reached for the lobby button one more time, and this time, the doors closed smoothly. The elevator started to go up, and the display showed the numbers passing each level. 1, 2, 3. It didn't stop on any of them, just kept going all the way to the lobby. When the doors opened, I felt a rush of relief wash over me. The lobby looked normal. The overhead lights were on, the front desk was empty, and everything was exactly the way it should have been. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and see the reflection of the lights on the polished floor. I ran out of the elevator, my footsteps echoing on the tile. My hands were shaking so hard that I had to take a moment to steady myself. The security desk was vacant. I scanned the area for any sign of the night guard, but the desk phone was on the hook, and the computer monitor was turned off. I called out, "Hello, anybody here?" My voice sounded rough, like I'd been screaming. No one answered. I went behind the desk and looked for a radio or some kind of communication device. Nothing. The place was deserted. I hurried to the main entrance and pushed on the glass doors. They opened. Outside, the streetlights were on, and a couple of cars passed by in the distance. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, inhaled the cool night air, and felt my pulse start to slow. My shirt was drenched in sweat and my face was flushed. I kept looking over my shoulder at the lobby, half expecting to see the lights flicker or someone appear, but everything stayed still. I walked a short distance, then stopped under a street lamp to catch my breath. My mouth was dry and my legs felt like jelly. I glanced back at the building's facade. It looked the same as always, just a tall, modern structure with big glass windows. Nothing appeared unusual from the outside. If I told someone about what happened, I wasn't sure they'd believe me, but I knew that I never wanted to step foot in that elevator again. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was much later than I thought, close to midnight. I hadn't realized how long I'd been in that elevator, but it felt like an eternity. The memory of those dark hallways, the flickering lights, and those distant voices stayed in my head. I stood there, breathing in the city air, trying to convince myself I was safe now. Eventually, I started walking away, looking for a cab. The streets were mostly empty, but a few cars and buses still rolled by. My hands were still trembling and my heart was still pounding. Every time I heard a noise, I jerked my head to look around. My back ached from how tense I'd been. I didn't trust my own senses. Part of me wanted to check into a motel instead of going home alone, but I didn't have the energy to argue with myself. I just needed to get somewhere familiar. I wanted to turn on all the lights and leave the TV on for background noise. By the time I found a taxi and sat in the back seat, I felt drained. The driver asked me if I was all right. I told him I was just having a rough night. I clutched my briefcase in my lap, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. My mind kept replaying those hallways, the weird shapes I thought I saw, and the voices that seemed to call out from empty floors. I kept touching the elevator button in my memory, feeling that frustration when it wouldn't respond. My heart still beat a little faster every time I remembered it. When I finally got home, I fumbled with my keys, dropped them twice, and swore under my breath. My front door felt heavier than usual. I locked it behind me, then double-locked it. I turned on every light in the living room. My breath was shaky and my lips felt numb. I tossed my jacket on the couch and sank into an armchair, trying to slow my breathing. My phone buzzed with some notification, but I ignored it. I needed to calm down. My legs felt weak. My entire body was covered in a thin layer of sweat. Eventually, I stood up and went to the kitchen. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run cold. I splashed some on my face and drank from my cupped hands, letting it soothe my throat. The cold water sent shivers down my spine, but it helped me focus on something real. I wiped my face with a towel, then looked at my reflection in the microwave's door. My eyes were bloodshot and I had this wild, anxious expression. I leaned on the counter for support. I spent the rest of the night walking around my apartment, checking every room, making sure every closet was empty and every window was locked. I knew it was ridiculous. There was no reason for any of those things to be out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something from that elevator ride might have followed me. Each time I glanced at a dark corner, I thought I heard a whisper or felt a slight draft. My heart would skip a beat. Then I'd realize it was just my imagination. Still, I couldn't settle down. I paced until I wore myself out. That was the longest night of my life. I tried to sleep on the couch with all the lights on. My body was exhausted, but my mind kept circling back to those strange floors, those open corridors, and the voices that came from nowhere. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flickering overhead light on the 7th floor and heard that single knock on a door. I felt my chest tighten all over again, and my stomach twisted into a knot. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to talk to someone at building management. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost my mind, but I had to say something. I wasn't even sure if I'd step back into that building for work. Just the thought of walking into that lobby made me sweat. But I needed answers. I needed some confirmation that I hadn't hallucinated the entire thing. I still remember every detail. The smell of the corridors, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the flicker on the panel, and those voices that kept calling from empty hallways. I remember the feeling of cold air on my ankles, and the sense that something was watching me from just beyond the shadows. And I know I won't forget it anytime soon. That elevator ride changed everything for me. Even now, I get uneasy whenever I stand in front of an elevator, watching the numbers count down. Sometimes I think I hear whispers before the doors open, and my pulse races all over again. Maybe it was a glitch, or maybe it was something else. All I know is that I was alone in that building, and I experienced floors that shouldn't exist. I heard voices that had no bodies. I saw corridors that didn't match anything I'd ever seen there before. And that's the truth, as plain and direct as I can tell it. I didn't see anyone die, and I didn't see any kids running around. I just heard things that made my skin crawl, and I visited places inside that building that I never want to see again. That's all I've got. And I'll never look at an empty building or an elevator quite the same way.